Hello, beautiful people. You've just landed on Monkey DFIC. Today's featured story is Luffy discovers his mother's true identity. If you're new here, welcome to the family. Hit subscribe and the notification bell. And if you're returning, you know the drill, like and share. Enough talk, let's get into the story. Chapter 1, The Woman from O'Hara. The thousand sunny cut through the waves like it was born to, spray flying up from its lion figurehead. Luffy sat cross-legged on his special seat, scanning the horizon with one hand shielding his eyes from the glaring sun. They'd been sailing through unfamiliar waters for days now, following one of Nami's hunches about an unmarked island. See anything yet? Nami called up from the deck, her orange hair whipping in the wind. Nope. Just more ocean. Luffy grinned, not seeming bothered by the lack of progress. But I got a good feeling about this. Adventure's coming, I can smell it. Usopp leaned against the railing next to Nami, his arms folded. The last time you said you could smell adventure, we ended up fighting sea kings for 3 days straight. Yeah, wasn't that awesome? Luffy laughed, throwing his head back. Zoro, who had been napping against the mast, cracked one eye open. There's something up ahead. Everyone turned to look where he was pointing. A faint smudge had appeared on the horizon, gradually taking shape as they approached. An island. Chopper squealed, rushing to the railing. And it's not on any of my charts, Nami added, frowning as she studied her maps. That's weird. We're not even in a particularly dangerous or remote area. Robin joined them, her eyes narrowing as she studied the approaching landmass. Perhaps it's hidden for a reason. Luffy's grin widened impossibly further. Only one way to find out. Frankie. Full speed ahead. You got it, Straw Hat. Frankie called from the helm, engaging the coup de burst. Super. The ship rocketed forward, sending everyone scrambling for something to hold on to. As they drew closer, the island came into clearer view, a modest-sized landmass with a central mountain and lush forests covering most of the terrain. What caught their attention, however, was the lack of any visible port or settlement from their approach. Doesn't look like anyone lives here, Sanji remarked, lighting a cigarette. Brook strummed a contemplative chord on his guitar. Appearances can be deceiving. I sense souls on this island, though I have no eyes to see with. Yo-ho-ho-ho. Luffy stretched his arms, preparing to launch himself to shore. Only one way to find out. Last one, there's a rotten sea king egg. Wait, Luffy. We need to approach with caution. Nami tried to grab him, but he had already rocketed himself toward the shore. That idiot never changes, Zoro muttered, but he was already drawing his swords, ready to follow his captain. Luffy landed with a thud on the sandy beach, kicking up a cloud of dust. The rest of the crew followed in their own ways, Zoro and Sanji racing each other to shore, Frankie deploying the Mini Mary for the others. As they regrouped on the beach, Luffy was already bouncing with excitement. Let's explore. I bet there's meat somewhere. We should be careful, Robin cautioned. Islands that don't appear on maps often have reasons for remaining hidden. Luffy shrugged. Hiding or not, if there's people here, they gotta eat. And if they eat, there's meat. His logic, while simplistic, had its own peculiar soundness. The Straw Hats moved inland, following a barely visible path through the dense vegetation. The forest was oddly quiet, no birds sang, no animals rustled in the undergrowth. This place gives me the creeps, Usopp whispered, clutching his slingshot tightly. Suddenly, Luffy stopped, his head tilted to one side. Hear that? The crew fell silent. At first, nothing seemed amiss, but then, faint voices carried on the breeze from somewhere ahead. People! Chopper exclaimed. Shoo! Nami hushed him, straining to listen. The voices grew clearer as they crept forward. Soon, they reached the edge of a clearing and what they saw made them stop in their tracks. Hidden among the trees was a settlement, dozens of simple huts and tents arranged in a rough circle. People of all ages moved about, carrying water, tending fires, mending clothes. But what struck the straw hats immediately was the atmosphere of tension. Armed lookouts patrolled the perimeter, and many of the adults had the haggard look of people who hadn't truly relaxed in a long time. They look like refugees, Robin observed quietly. But refugees from what? Jinbe wondered. Before they could discuss further, a shout rang out from one of the lookouts. Intruders! To arms! In an instant, the camp erupted into controlled chaos. Children were hustled into huts, while adults grabbed weapons and formed defensive positions. Wait! We're friendly! Luffy called out, stepping forward with his hands raised. We're just... He didn't get to finish his sentence before a blur of motion shot out from the trees to their right. One moment, Luffy was standing at the front of the group, the next, he was pinned to the ground with a knife at his throat. Who sent you? Demanded a woman's voice, cold and dangerous. The Straw Hats reacted instantly, weapons drawn, but froze when they got a clear look at their attacker. She was tall and lithe, with long black hair pulled back in a practical braid. Her face was all sharp angles and determined lines, but what caught their attention most were her eyes, fierce, intelligent, and somehow familiar. She wore practical fighting clothes, weathered from use, and held her knife with the steady hand of someone who knew exactly how to use it. Nobody sent us. Luffy said, sounding more annoyed than scared despite the blade at his throat. We're pirates. We found your island by accident. The woman's eyes narrowed, studying Luffy's face. Then, her gaze traveled upward, landing on his straw hat. Something flickered across her expression, surprise, maybe even recognition. Pirates, she repeated flatly. Then her eyes scanned the rest of the crew, pausing momentarily on each face. You're the Straw Hat Pirates. That's right. Luffy grinned despite his predicament. I'm Monkey D. Luffy, and I'm gonna be king of the pirates. The knife pressed slightly harder against his skin. D, she whispered, almost to herself. Then, to everyone's surprise, she removed the knife and stood up in one fluid motion. You shouldn't be here. None of you should. This island is hidden for a reason. And what reason is that? Robin asked, her arms crossed but her archaeologist's curiosity evident. The woman looked at Robin, something like recognition flashing in her eyes. You're Nico Robin. The scholar of O'Hara. It wasn't a question. Robin tensed. You know of O'Hara? The woman's expression darkened. More than know of it. She glanced around at the settlement behind her, then back at the pirates. My name is Portia D. Aurora. And these people are survivors, refugees from islands the world government would rather forget existed. The name caught Luffy's attention. You're A.D. he asked, jumping to his feet and brushing dirt from his clothes. Aurora didn't answer directly. Instead, she turned toward the settlement. Come with me. You've been spotted now, so you might as well understand what you've stumbled into. But be warned, your presence here puts everyone at risk. As they followed Aurora into the settlement, the defensive posture of the inhabitants didn't fully relax, but the most aggressive weapons were lowered. People watched them pass with wary eyes, some with open fear. These people, Nami said quietly. What happened to them? Aurora's steps didn't falter. The world government happened to them. Buster calls, quiet purges, islands erased from history because someone found something they weren't supposed to find, or knew something they weren't supposed to know. Like O'Hara, Robin murmured. Aurora glanced back at her. Yes. Exactly like O'Hara. They reached a larger structure at the center of the settlement, a simple but sturdy wooden building that seemed to serve as a communal gathering place. Inside, maps covered one wall, and a large table dominated the center of the room. Sit, Aurora instructed, gesturing to the benches around the table. As they did, she remained standing, studying them with calculating eyes. You say you found this island by accident? Nami nodded. I noticed inconsistencies in the sea currents. They suggested land where none was supposed to exist. Impressive navigation skills, Aurora acknowledged. But dangerous. This island is protected by more than just being absent from maps. There are underwater current manipulators and weather generators that should make it nearly impossible to find unless you know exactly what you're looking for. Well, Nami's the best navigator in the world. Luffy declared proudly. Aurora's gaze lingered on Luffy for a moment before she continued. This island serves as a sanctuary. We call it Haven. It's one of several secret locations where people who have escaped the world government's attempts to erase them can find refuge. And you run this place? Sanji asked. Aurora shook her head. I help. I move between the sanctuaries, bringing supplies, information, and occasionally new refugees. She paused. I have certain skills that make me useful for that role. What kind of skills? Luffy asked bluntly. Before Aurora could answer, the door burst open and a young man rushed in, panic clear on his face. Aurora. Navy ships approaching from the south. At least 3 battleships. The woman's face hardened. How long? 20 minutes, maybe less. They're moving fast. Aurora turned to the straw hats, her expression accusing. Were you followed? Impossible, Frankie said firmly. The Sunny has anti-detection systems, and we've been careful about our trail. Aurora studied them for a moment, then nodded sharply. I believe you. This is likely just bad timing, the Navy has been increasing patrols in this sector for weeks. She turned to the messenger. Sound the alarm. Evacuation Protocol 3. As the young man ran out, the settlement immediately erupted into well-practiced activity. Aurora turned back to the pirates. You should return to your ship and leave immediately. Your presence here will only complicate matters. And let you face 3 battleships alone. No way. Luffy stood up, cracking his knuckles. We're not the kind of pirates who run from a fight. This isn't your fight, Aurora insisted. We made it our fight when we stepped onto this island, Jinbe countered. These people need help. And we're good at helping, Chopper added earnestly. Aurora looked like she wanted to argue further, but another messenger appeared at the door. It's Admiral Kogan's fleet. The color drained from Aurora's face. Kogan, she whispered, and for the first time, they saw a flicker of fear cross her features. Who's Kogan? Zoro asked, hand already on his swords. An admiral who specializes in hunting down what the world government wants erased, Aurora replied, her voice tight. He has a personal vendetta against me. Why? Robin asked. Aurora's eyes flashed. Because I escaped him once before. At O'Hara. The revelation landed like a thunderbolt. Robin's eyes widened. You were at O'Hara? During the Buster call? Aurora nodded grimly. I was a scholar there. Not as advanced as Professor Clover or your mother, but I was learning. She looked directly at Robin. I thought all scholars died that day, except you. Finding out you survived, it gives me hope. How did you escape? Robin asked, her voice barely above a whisper. That's a story for another time, Aurora said, moving toward the door. Right now, we need to evacuate these people. Luffy stepped forward, his face set in determination. You handle the evacuation. We'll deal with the Navy. Aurora studied him, something unreadable in her eyes. You're sure about this? Absolutely. Luffy grinned, punching his fist into his palm. It's what we do. For the first time, Aurora smiled, a quick, fleeting thing that transformed her severe face. You remind me of someone I used to know. Before anyone could ask who, she was already issuing orders. The refugees will evacuate through the underground tunnels to the north side of the island. There's a secondary sanctuary there where they can hide temporarily. And after we kick the Navy's butt? Usopp asked, trying to sound braver than he felt. If, and that's a big if, you manage to drive them off, meet us at the North Ridge. Aurora hesitated, then added, thank you. With that, she was gone, immediately organizing the evacuation with practiced efficiency. The Straw Hats watched as people grabbed pre-packed bags and moved with urgent purpose. She's something else, Frankie commented. Yeah, Luffy agreed, his gaze following Aurora as she lifted two children onto her shoulders without breaking stride. There's something familiar about her. No time to dwell on it now, Zoro said, nodding toward the south. We've got company coming. The crew quickly divided responsibilities. Frankie, Usopp, and Brook would return to the Sunny to provide sea support and prevent any Navy landings on the beach. The rest would form a defensive line at the southern edge of the settlement to buy time for the evacuation. As they moved into position, Luffy caught sight of Aurora again. She was doing something remarkable, her arms stretched, not quite like his rubber powers, but with a similar elasticity, allowing her to pass bundles of supplies up to people already on the ridge above. The sight made him pause. Did you see that? He asked Zoro, who was beside him. See what? Aurora's arms, they stretched. Zoro raised an eyebrow. You sure about that? We're pretty far away. Before Luffy could respond, the first cannon fire echoed across the water. The battle had begun. The next hour passed in a blur of combat. The Navy forces landed on the South Beach despite Frankie's best efforts with the Sunny's cannon. Marine soldiers poured onto the island, led by officers with clear orders to search every inch of the sanctuary. Luffy, Zoro, Sanji, and Jinbe formed the main defensive line, cutting through waves of Marines with well-practiced teamwork. Nami and Robin protected the escape routes, while Chopper darted between groups, providing both combat support and medical assistance where needed. They're pushing hard for an ordinary patrol, Sanji remarked, kicking away 3 Marines in quick succession. This isn't ordinary, Jinbe replied, sending a wave of water that knocked back an entire squad. They knew what they were looking for. Luffy punched his way through to a higher vantage point and surveyed the battle. Most of the refugees seemed to have evacuated successfully, but the Marines kept coming. And then he saw something that made his blood run cold. A tall figure stepped onto the beach, a man in an admiral's coat, moving with deliberate, unhurried steps. The very air around him seemed distorted, and Marines and debris alike were pulled toward him before being flung away with crushing force. Gravity powers, Luffy muttered, recognizing a paramecia-type devil fruit when he saw one. Admiral Kogan was imposing, broad-shouldered with close-cropped silver hair and a scar running down one side of his face. His eyes scanned the battlefield methodically until they locked onto something in the distance. Luffy followed his gaze and saw Aurora helping the last group of refugees over the ridge. Found you, Kogan's voice carried across the battlefield, unnaturally loud. He raised one hand, and Aurora suddenly dropped to her knees, pinned by invisible force. Aurora! Luffy shouted, already launching himself toward her without a second thought. Kogan turned, noticing Luffy for the first time. His eyes widened slightly in recognition, then narrowed. Straw Hat Luffy. Interesting company you keep these days. Luffy landed between Kogan and Aurora, his fists already blackened with armament hockey. Leave her alone. Aurora struggled against the gravity pressing down on her. Luffy, no. He's too dangerous. Kogan looked between them, a cold smile spreading across his face. Well, this is unexpected. Don't tell me you don't know, Straw Hat. Know what? Luffy demanded, not taking his eyes off the Admiral. Nothing he says can be trusted, Aurora grunted, finally managing to get one knee under herself despite the crushing gravity. Kogan laughed. The resemblance is remarkable, now that I see you both together. Though I suppose that's to be expected. Luffy had no idea what the Admiral was talking about, but he didn't care. Aurora was in danger, and that was all that mattered. He charged forward, arms stretching back. Gomu Gomu no Red Hawk. His flaming fist shot forward, only to be caught in a gravity well that Kogan created with a casual gesture. Luffy found himself pulled off balance, flying toward the Admiral faster than he intended. Kogan's other hand came up, and suddenly Luffy felt like he weighed 1,000 tons, slamming into the ground so hard he created a crater. Pathetic, Kogan said. Just like your father. All that power, no discipline. Despite the crushing pressure, Luffy managed to turn his head toward Aurora, who had somehow fought her way back to her feet. Her stance was familiar somehow, and the look of fierce determination on her face even more so. Get away from him. She shouted, and suddenly her arms turned black with haki, just like Luffy's. She charged Kogan, moving with a speed that belied her earlier struggles. The Admiral turned to face her, momentarily releasing some of the pressure on Luffy. Their battle was intense and personal. Aurora attacked with a combination of haki-infused strikes and what seemed like partial transformations that Luffy couldn't quite make sense of. You've improved since O'Hara, Kogan noted, deflecting one of her strikes. Been training with Dragon, I assume. Aurora didn't respond with words, just renewed her assault. There was something in her fighting style that nagged at Luffy's consciousness, something eerily familiar. Taking advantage of the distraction, Luffy forced himself back to his feet. The rest of the Straw Hats were engaged with the remaining marine forces, gradually pushing them back toward the beach. But Aurora and Kogan's fight was on another level entirely, the ground cracking beneath them with each exchange of blows. You can't protect them forever, Kogan taunted Aurora. The world government knows about this sanctuary now. It's only a matter of time before we find all your little hideaways. There will always be places beyond your reach, Aurora shot back, dodging a gravity pulse that shattered a tree behind her. People who refuse to be erased. Luffy rejoined the fight, attacking Kogan from his blind side. The Admiral was forced to divide his attention, giving Aurora an opening to land a solid hit that actually made Kogan stagger. Not bad, the Admiral admitted, wiping blood from his lip. Like mother, like son in more ways than one, it seems. The strange comment distracted Luffy for just a fraction of a second, but that was all Kogan needed. A wave of gravity slammed into him, sending him flying backward into the trees. Before he could recover, another pulse hit Aurora, pinning her once more. Kogan advanced on her, producing a pair of sea stone handcuffs. The 5 elders have waited a long time to get their hands on you, Aurora. All the knowledge you stole from O'Hara, all the secrets you've uncovered since, they're very interested in extracting every last bit of it from your mind. I'll die before I tell them anything, Aurora spat, still struggling against his power. That can be arranged, Kogan replied coldly. But not before you've served your purpose. Luffy pulled himself from the wreckage of the trees, his body aching but his will undiminished. Get away from her, he roared, his body shifting into gear 4th. The transformation sent pulses of haki-infused rubber rippling across his muscles. Kogan turned, genuine surprise registering on his face as Luffy shot toward him like a bullet. Interesting, he murmured, raising both hands to create a gravity barrier. But Luffy had fought gravity users before. He twisted mid-air, bouncing off the barrier rather than trying to push through it. The maneuver caught Kogan off guard, allowing Luffy to land a devastating blow to the Admiral's side. Kogan grunted in pain but didn't fall. Instead, he created a gravity well so intense that even in gear 4th, Luffy found himself being pulled inexorably toward the Admiral. Your father gave you up to chase his revolutionary dreams, Kogan said conversationally, even as he prepared to deliver what would likely be a crippling blow. And your mother abandoned you for her precious knowledge. The will of D brings nothing but destruction to everyone it touches. The words penetrated Luffy's battle focus. My mother? Aurora had somehow managed to stand again despite the gravity field. Luffy, don't listen to him. He's trying to distract you. But he should know the truth, shouldn't he, Aurora? Kogan's smile was vicious. About why you really left him behind? Before the conversation could continue, a massive explosion rocked the battlefield. The Thousand Sunny had circled around and Frankie had launched a direct hit on Kogan's flagship with the Jaen cannon. The distraction was enough to break Kogan's concentration, freeing both Luffy and Aurora from the gravity field. Aurora immediately took advantage, moving to Luffy's side. We need to retreat. The refugees are safe, there's no reason to continue this fight. Luffy, still in Gear 4th, looked at her with confusion swirling in his eyes. What was he talking about? About my mother? Not now, she said firmly. I promise I'll explain everything, but we need to get out of here first. Across the battlefield, Kogan was already regrouping, issuing orders to his marines to form a new attack formation. He looked toward Luffy and Aurora, his eyes cold with promise. This isn't over. No, Aurora agreed quietly. It never is with him. The Straw Hats executed a fighting retreat, with Zoro, Sanji, and Jinbe providing cover while the others made their way toward the North Ridge. Luffy stayed close to Aurora, stealing glances at her whenever he could. Now that Kogan had planted the seed, he couldn't help but notice things, the shape of her eyes, the determined set of her jaw, the way she moved when she fought. They reached the ridge where the last of the refugees were disappearing into a hidden tunnel entrance. Robin was coordinating with some of the sanctuary leaders, while Chopper tended to the wounded. Everyone made it out, Robin reported as they approached. No casualties among the refugees, though some injuries. Aurora nodded, relief evident on her face. Thank you. All of you. Without your help, this could have been a massacre. Don't thank us yet, Nami said, pointing toward the beach. They're regrouping, not retreating. Indeed, Kogan's forces were reorganizing, and supply boats were coming from the battleships, they were settling in for a longer operation. They'll search the entire island, Aurora said grimly. We need to get to the secondary location and evacuate everyone by sea. The Sunny can help with that, Frankie offered, rejoining the group. She's built for speed and can carry quite a few people. Aurora nodded gratefully, then turned to Luffy, who had been uncharacteristically quiet. We should talk, she said softly. But not here. Luffy looked at her, his expression unusually serious. Is what Kogan said. Aurora placed a hand on his shoulder, and something in that touch felt right in a way Luffy couldn't explain. Later, she promised. When we're safe. As they followed the tunnel into the mountain, Luffy found himself walking beside Robin. The archaeologist was watching Aurora with intense curiosity. She was at O'Hara, Robin said quietly. And she survived. Yeah, Luffy replied, his mind still turning over Kogan's words. But I think there's more to it than that. Robin glanced at him. What do you mean? Luffy watched Aurora ahead of them, confidently leading the way through the dark tunnels. Did you see how she fought? Her haki, the way she moved, and Kogan kept saying weird stuff about my parents. Understanding dawned on Robin's face. You think she might be? I don't know what to think, Luffy admitted. But I'm gonna find out. The tunnels opened into a large cavern on the north side of the island, where the remaining refugees had gathered. Beyond the cavern was a hidden cove with several small boats already being prepared for departure. Aurora immediately took charge, organizing the evacuation with practiced efficiency. The Straw Hats pitched in, with Frankie returning to bring the Sunny around to the cove. Throughout it all, Luffy found his gaze continually drawn to Aurora, watching how she interacted with the refugees, gentle with the children, firm but kind with the adults, inspiring confidence in everyone around her. As the evacuation progressed, Luffy noticed Aurora slip away from the main group, moving to a quiet corner of the cavern where she pulled out a baby Den Den mushie. Curious, he followed, staying just close enough to overhear. It's me, Aurora said into the snail phone. Haven has been compromised. Kogan himself led the attack. A pause as she listened to the response. Yes, all refugees evacuated successfully. We're moving to Location Crescent now. Another pause. No, that's not all. Dragon, the Straw Hats are here. Luffy is here. The name of his father caught Luffy's attention. He edged closer. I know we agreed I would stay away from him, but this wasn't planned. They found the island by accident. A longer pause. Yes, he's grown so much. He's exactly as you described, determined, strong-willed, kind. Her voice softened. He has your smile. Luffy's heart pounded in his chest. Was she talking to his father about him? Kogan said things, he might suspect who I am. Aurora's voice tightened. I don't know if I should tell him the truth. After all this time, do I have the right? A shorter pause. I understand. I'll use my judgment. Aurora out. She put away the den mushi and stood still for a moment, her shoulders tense. Then, as if sensing his presence, she turned. How long have you been standing there? She asked, not sounding particularly surprised. Long enough, Luffy answered. He stepped forward, studying her face with unusual intensity. You were talking to my dad, weren't you? About me. Aurora didn't immediately deny it, which was answer enough. It's complicated, Luffy. Kogan said something about my mother. About you. Luffy wasn't usually one for beating around the bush. Are we? Before Aurora could respond, Zoro appeared at the entrance to their alcove. Marines found the northern tunnel entrance. They'll be here in minutes. Aurora's expression shifted immediately back to the competent leader. Get everyone on the boats now. Priority to children and the elderly. As they rushed back to the main cavern, Luffy caught her arm. This conversation isn't over. Aurora met his gaze, something like sadness mixed with pride in her eyes. No, she agreed softly. It's only beginning. The evacuation turned frantic as the sounds of marine boots echoed from the tunnels. The Sunny had arrived in the cove, taking on as many refugees as it could safely carry. The rest were distributed among the smaller boats, with straw hats accompanying each vessel to provide protection. Aurora, you should go with the first group, one of the sanctuary leaders urged. She shook her head. I'll go with the last. I can hold them off if needed. Her eyes found Luffy. You should go with your crew. I'm staying with you, Luffy stated, his tone making it clear this wasn't up for discussion. For a moment, it looked like Aurora might argue, but instead she gave a short nod. Fine. But you follow my lead. As the last of the refugees boarded the boats, Luffy, Aurora, Zoro, and Sanji remained to cover their escape. The sounds of marines grew closer. Once the boats are safely away, we swim for the Sunny, Aurora instructed. If we get separated, make for the western archipelago, there's another sanctuary there. The first marines burst from the tunnel entrance, immediately met with a barrage of attacks. Zoro's swords flashed, cutting through rifles before they could be fired. Sanji's kick sent soldiers flying back into their comrades. Luffy and Aurora fought side by side, their styles complementing each other in a way that felt natural, almost instinctive. They fight alike, Sanji muttered to Zoro as they regrouped during a momentary lull. You noticed too, huh? Zoro replied, eyes narrowed. Same instincts, similar techniques. Another wave of marines poured in, this time led by one of Kogan's vice-admirals. The fight intensified, with Aurora displaying skills that impressed even the battle-hardened Straw Hats. Her haki was extraordinary, and while she didn't have Luffy's rubber abilities, she displayed what seemed like partial transformations, hands hardening into claws, skin taking on protective qualities against blades. What kind of devil fruit is that? Luffy asked during a brief respite. Aurora dispatched a marine with a haki-infused punch. Not a devil fruit. It's something else. Something inherited. Before Luffy could ask more questions, a familiar crushing presence announced Kogan's arrival. The Admiral strode through his own men, his coat billowing behind him. "Enough games," he said, raising both hands. The gravity in the entire cavern intensified, driving all 4 defenders to their knees. "The boats are clear." Sanji managed to shout before the pressure became too intense to speak. Aurora somehow fought through the gravity, her body visibly straining. "Luffy," she gasped. "You need to go. All of you. Not without you." Luffy growled, also fighting to stand despite the crushing force. Kogan approached slowly, focused primarily on Aurora. 20 years I've hunted you, Aurora. Ever since you slipped away at O'Hara with those forbidden texts. Did you think I wouldn't recognize your son when I saw him?" His cold gaze shifted to Luffy. "The resemblance is remarkable. Though he has his father's recklessness." "Shut up," Aurora snarled, managing to get one foot under herself. Kogan increased the pressure, driving her back down. "The 5 elders want you alive, but they didn't specify what condition." He produced a sea stone blade. "Perhaps I'll start by taking a hand. The same one you broke mine with at Baltigo." At the mention of the Revolutionary Army's former headquarters, Luffy's eyes widened. Aurora had been at Baltigo? With his father? What happened next occurred so quickly that even Zoro had trouble following it. Aurora's eyes flashed with something primal, and suddenly the gravity around her seemed to warp. With a scream of effort, she broke free of Kogan's hold and launched herself at the Admiral, moving with impossible speed. "Sovereign's will!" she shouted, her fist connecting with Kogan's chest. The impact sent out a visible shockwave, and the Admiral flew backward, crashing through several Marines and into the tunnel wall. For a moment, everyone stood frozen in shock. Even the Marines seemed stunned by what they'd witnessed. Aurora didn't waste the opportunity. "Go!" she shouted at the Straw Hats, her voice carrying an authority that even Luffy responded to instinctively. "Get to the Sunny. Now!" They ran for the cove exit, but Luffy hesitated, looking back at Aurora who stood facing the recovering Kogan. "What about you?" he called. Aurora glanced back, a sad smile on her face. "I'll be right behind you. I promise." It was a lie, and they both knew it. She was creating a diversion. "No." Luffy turned back, but Zoro and Sanji each grabbed an arm. "She's giving us a chance, Luffy," Zoro said grimly. "Don't waste it. I can't leave her." Luffy struggled against his friend's grip. Aurora locked eyes with him across the cavern. "Luffy," she called, her voice suddenly gentle despite the chaos. "I've always been proud of you. Even when I couldn't be with you." The words hit Luffy like a physical blow. In that moment, he knew, Kogan had been telling the truth. This woman, this warrior who fought with such familiar determination, was his mother. Kogan rose from the rubble, his admiral's coat torn and blood trickling from his mouth. "How touching," he sneered. "A family reunion cut short." "Get him out of here," Aurora said to Zoro and Sanji, never taking her eyes off Kogan. "Please." With painful reluctance, they dragged a still protesting Luffy toward the cove exit. The last thing Luffy saw before they pulled him around the corner was Aurora standing tall against the advancing admiral, her stance mirroring his own when facing overwhelming odds. "Aurora," he shouted, still struggling against his friends. "Luffy, we have to go," Sanji insisted. "The Sunny's waiting." "But she's we know," Zoro cut him off. "And we'll get her back. But not today." The water of the cove was cold when they dove in, swimming toward the Sunny which waited just beyond the reef. Luffy kept looking back toward the cavern, hoping to see Aurora following them, but knowing she wouldn't be. As they climbed aboard the Sunny, the rest of the crew and the refugees they'd taken on gathered at the railing. Nami was already directing Frankie to set course away from the island. "Where's Aurora?" Robin asked, noting their grim expressions. She stayed behind, Sanji answered quietly. To buy us time. We have to go back. Luffy immediately declared, moving toward the helm. Jinbe blocked his path. Luffy, there are 3 battleships out there, and an admiral who just defeated a very powerful warrior. Going back now would risk everyone on this ship. I don't care. We can't leave her with him. Luffy's voice cracked with emotion he rarely displayed. Robin placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Luffy, is she who I think she is? Luffy looked at his archaeologist, his eyes filled with confusion, anger, and pain. She's my mother, Robin. I'm sure of it now. And I just found her. I can't lose her already. The revelation stunned the crew into momentary silence. It was Nami who broke it, her voice gentle but firm. Then we'll save her, Luffy. But we need to be smart about it. These refugees need protection, and we need a plan. Nami's right, Jinbe agreed. Aurora sacrificed herself so these people could escape. We dishonor that sacrifice if we rush back without preparation. Luffy looked around at his crew, then at the frightened refugees they'd taken aboard. His fists clenched at his sides, but slowly, the wild look in his eyes subsided. Fine, he said finally. But once these people are safe, we're going after her. No matter what. Of course we are, Zoro said simply. She's your mother. That makes her family. As the Sunny sailed away from Haven, Luffy stood at the stern, watching the island recede into the distance. His mind was a whirlwind of questions. Why had his mother never been part of his life? Why had no one, not even Grandpa Garp, ever mentioned her? What was this power she had that seemed similar to his own but different? And most importantly, how was he going to get her back from Admiral Kogan? One of the refugees approached him cautiously, an older woman with kind eyes and gray-streaked hair. You're Aurora's son, she said. It wasn't a question. Luffy nodded. I think so. I just found out. The woman smiled sadly. She spoke of you sometimes, though never by name. She kept a picture of you as a baby, though she thought no one knew about it. She did. Something warm and painful twisted in Luffy's chest. Aurora has saved many of us over the years, the woman continued. Not just at Haven, but at sanctuaries across the world. She's a hero to people the world government wants forgotten. Why didn't she ever? Luffy trailed off, unsure how to finish the question. Come find you, the woman suggested gently. I can't say for certain, but Aurora always said she made a sacrifice to protect something precious. I think now, I understand what she meant. The woman left him with those words, returning to the other refugees. Luffy remained at the stern, watching until Haven vanished completely from view. His straw hat cast a shadow over his eyes, hiding the emotions that played across his face. I'm going to find you, he promised quietly. And then you're going to tell me everything. In the distance, dark clouds gathered over Haven, as if the island itself mourned what had been lost there. Chapter 2, Echoes of the Void. 3 days after escaping Haven, the Thousand Sunny anchored in a hidden cove on a small, uninhabited island in the western archipelago. The refugees had been safely delivered to another sanctuary, a cave network carved into a mountainside and protected by both natural defenses and clever Revolutionary Army engineering. Luffy hadn't slept much. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Aurora standing alone against Admiral Kogan, buying them time to escape. The image wouldn't leave him, and neither would the words she'd spoken, I've always been proud of you. Even when I couldn't be with you. He sat cross-legged on Sunny's figurehead, staring out at the horizon as dawn broke. Footsteps approached behind him, and Robin's calm voice broke his reverie. The refugees gave me this, she said, holding out a small, weathered leather notebook. They said it belonged to Aurora. She left it at the Western Sanctuary during her last visit. Luffy took it, running his fingers over the cover. Have you looked inside? Robin shook her head. I thought you should see it first. Luffy flipped the book open. Inside were notes, drawings, and what looked like partial translations of something. Many pages were filled with strange symbols that Luffy didn't recognize, but Robin gasped when she saw them. Those are poneglyph transcriptions, she said, leaning closer. And these notes, she was trying to decode them. Robin's fingers traced the careful annotations in the margins. This is extraordinary work. Luffy turned more pages, stopping when he found a hand-drawn map. Look at this. Robin studied it. It shows a route through what appears to be a chain of unmarked islands. Can you tell where it leads? Robin frowned in concentration. Not exactly, but... She pulled out her own notebook and compared some coordinates. I believe this final island might be located in what sailors call the Devil's Triangle, a region notorious for ships disappearing. Luffy stood up suddenly, his eyes bright with determination. That's where we'll find answers. And maybe a way to rescue Aurora. It could be dangerous, Robin cautioned. If these notes are correct, Aurora was investigating something related to the Void Century, knowledge the world government has killed to keep secret. I don't care, Luffy said simply. She's my mother. And she knows things about me, about who I am, that nobody else does. Robin nodded, understanding in her eyes. I'll work with Nami to chart our course. As Robin walked away, Luffy continued examining the notebook. Near the back, he found something that made his heart skip, a small, faded photograph tucked between the pages. It showed a much younger Aurora holding a baby wrapped in a red blanket. The infant's face was barely visible, but there was no mistaking the wide, toothless grin. Luffy stared at the photo for a long time, emotions he rarely experienced washing over him. Then he carefully tucked it back into the notebook and jumped down to the deck. Everyone, he called, his voice carrying across the ship. We've got a heading. The crew gathered quickly, and Luffy explained what they'd found. As Robin spread out the map from Aurora's notebook, the others leaned in with interest. So we're going after your mom, Zoro stated matter-of-factly. And potentially discovering something about the Void Century, Robin added, unable to hide her excitement. Nami studied the map with a professional eye. This route takes us through some tricky waters. Unpredictable currents, magnetic anomalies, no wonder it's unmarked. Can we navigate it? Luffy asked. Nami gave him a confident smile. Of course. Just might take some creative sailing. The Sunny can handle it, Frankie declared, striking his signature pose. I'll make sure she's super prepared. What about Kogan? Jinbe asked, bringing the conversation back to their most immediate threat. If he has Aurora, he may be expecting us to attempt a rescue. Let him expect it, Luffy said, cracking his knuckles. Next time, I'll be ready for his gravity tricks. We should gather information first, Robin suggested. According to these notes, Aurora was investigating something specific, something she believed was crucial to understanding the Void Century and perhaps the will of D itself. And if we find what she was looking for, Sanji added, lighting a cigarette, we might gain leverage to help free her. Usopp, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, raised a hand. Just to be clear, we're sailing into a place ships disappear, looking for ancient forbidden knowledge, all while an admiral with a personal vendetta is probably hunting us? Sounds about right, Zoro said with a smirk. Just checking, Usopp sighed. The I can't sail into the Devil's Triangle disease is acting up again. Think of the history we might discover. Brook enthused, ignoring Usopp's complaints. I'm so excited my heart is racing. Though I don't have a heart. Yo-ho-ho-ho. Chopper tugged at Luffy's shorts. Do you really think Aurora is your mother? Luffy nodded, his expression unusually serious. Yeah. I do. Then we'll definitely save her, Chopper said firmly. With their course decided, the Straw Hats prepared to sail. Nami and Robin pored over the maps, calculating the safest route through the Devil's Triangle. Frankie checked the Sunny's systems, making adjustments for the unusual waters ahead. Sanji stocked up on provisions, while Zoro napped, his way of preparing for the battles sure to come. Luffy returned to the figurehead, Aurora's notebook in his hands. As he flipped through it again, something caught his eye, a page with what looked like notes about devil fruits and something called Sovereign's Will. He remembered Aurora shouting those words during her fight with Kogan, just before unleashing that powerful attack. "What are you, really?" he murmured, tracing his fingers over her handwriting. "And why did you never come find me?" The answers, he hoped, lay ahead at the mysterious island Aurora had marked as their final destination. The journey through the Devil's Triangle proved as challenging as Nami had predicted. Unpredictable currents tried to pull them off course. Bizarre weather phenomena appeared without warning, waterspouts forming in clear skies, fog that glowed with eerie blue light, rain that fell upward instead of down. On the third day, they encountered their first real danger, a massive whirlpool that appeared directly in their path, too suddenly to sail around. "Coup de burst!" Frankie shouted, activating the Sunny's emergency propulsion system. The ship rocketed over the whirlpool, barely clearing its outer edge before crashing back into the sea beyond. "That wasn't natural," Nami said, frowning at her log pose, which was spinning wildly. "It's like something's interfering with the normal laws of nature here." "Or someone," Robin suggested. According to Aurora's notes, this region was specifically altered during the Void Century to protect something. "Altered how?" Chopper asked, still clinging to the mast after their rough landing. Robin's expression grew thoughtful. She theorized that the ancient kingdom had technology far beyond our current understanding, devices that could manipulate weather, currents, even gravity itself. "Like Admiral Kogan's devil fruit," Luffy said. "Perhaps," Robin nodded. "Or perhaps his powers are merely a shadow of what once existed." As they ventured deeper into the triangle, strange islands appeared and disappeared in the mist, some looking solid one moment only to fade like mirages the next. The Sunny's instruments became increasingly unreliable, forcing them to navigate by Aurora's hand-drawn map and Nami's instincts. On the fifth day, just when it seemed they might be hopelessly lost, the fog cleared suddenly to reveal an island unlike any they had seen before. Its shore was lined with massive stone pillars half submerged in the water, each carved with symbols similar to those in Aurora's notebook. Beyond the beach rose stepped pyramids and buildings of an architecture none of them recognized, all overgrown with vegetation after centuries of abandonment. "This is it," Robin whispered, awe in her voice. "An outpost of the ancient kingdom." They anchored the Sunny between two of the massive pillars, using them as natural protection from the elements and prying eyes. As they prepared to go ashore, Luffy studied the island with intense focus. "Aurora was here," he said with certainty. "I can feel it." Robin nodded. According to her notes, she visited at least twice. She believed something in the central temple might explain the true meaning of the will of D. They split into two groups. Frankie, Brook, and Chopper would stay with the Sunny, while Luffy, Zoro, Nami, Usopp, Sanji, Robin, and Jinbe explored the island. The jungle that had reclaimed much of the ancient city was dense and humid, filled with unfamiliar plants and occasional ruins poking through the greenery. Robin led the way, consulting Aurora's notebook frequently. She mapped out a path to the central pyramid, she explained, pushing aside a large leaf. "And noted several traps we should avoid." "Traps?" Usopp squeaked. "What kind of traps?" As if in answer, Zoro's foot pressed down on a stone that sank slightly into the ground. A series of mechanical clicks echoed from the walls around them, and suddenly darts shot from hidden openings. "Those kinds of traps." Nami shrieked, ducking behind Zoro, who was already deflecting darts with his swords. Luffy stretched his arms, grabbing Usopp and Nami and pulling them to safety while Sanji kicked away darts heading toward Robin. Jinbe simply stood his ground, the tiny projectiles bouncing harmlessly off his tough fishman skin. The ancient kingdom's security system still works after all this time. Sanji marveled, once the danger had passed. Some of it, Robin confirmed, examining one of the darts Zoro had caught. Their engineering was extraordinary. They continued more cautiously, following Robin's guidance to avoid most of the traps. Occasionally they were forced to trigger one deliberately to progress, using their various abilities to neutralize the danger. It became almost a game, Zoro cutting through stone barriers, Sanji kicking mechanical devices into jamming, Luffy stretching across chasms to create bridges for the others. Finally, they reached the central pyramid. Its entrance was blocked by a massive stone door covered in the same symbols they had seen on the pillars. "Can you read it?" Luffy asked Robin. She traced the symbols with her fingers. "Only partially. It's an older form than the poneglyphs I've studied. But it seems to be a warning." She translated slowly, "Beyond this threshold lies the legacy of our people. Only those who carry the will of D may enter without consequence." "Well, that's you, Luffy," Nami said, nudging him forward. Luffy approached the door, placing his hand on a circular indentation at its center. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, symbols around the edge of the circle began to glow with a soft blue light, and the massive door started to swing inward, stone grinding against stone. "How did you know to do that?" Usopp asked, eyes wide. Luffy shrugged. "Dunno. Just felt right." The chamber beyond was vast, its ceiling lost in shadows. As they entered, torches along the walls ignited spontaneously, revealing a sight that left even Robin speechless. The circular room was dominated by a massive model of the world, a globe suspended in the center, slowly rotating without any visible means of support. Around the walls were mosaics depicting a history none of them had seen in any book, scenes of a great civilization, advanced technology, and what appeared to be a devastating war. And at the far end, on a raised dais, stood a cube of black stone, a poneglyph unlike any Robin had encountered before. "It's golden," she gasped, approaching the stone with reverence. Indeed, the normally red symbols on this poneglyph were inlaid with gold, gleaming in the torchlight. "What does it say?" Luffy asked, already moving toward it. Before Robin could answer, the room shuddered. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the torches flickered. "What was that?" Nami asked, looking around nervously. "Someone else is here," Jinbe said, his fishman senses alert. "Multiple someones." Zoro drew his swords. "Looks like we weren't the only ones following Aurora's trail." The room shuddered again, more violently this time. The sound of distant explosions reached them. "That's cannon fire," Sanji said grimly. "Navy." "Kogan," Luffy growled, his fists clenching. Robin turned from the poneglyph, her face pale. "We need time. This contains information about the will of D and something called the Sovereign's lineage. It may explain Aurora's powers, and yours too, Luffy." "How much time?" Zoro asked. "More than we have," Robin admitted. "But I can copy the symbols for later translation." "Do it," Luffy decided. "Zoro, Sanji, Jinbe, let's buy her some time." The four fighters headed back toward the entrance while Robin began rapidly sketching the poneglyph symbols in her notebook. Nami and Usopp stayed with her, ready to defend if necessary. Outside the pyramid, chaos had erupted. 3 Navy battleships had somehow navigated the treacherous waters of the Devil's Triangle and were bombarding the ancient city. Marine soldiers were already coming ashore in landing boats, and at their head was a familiar silver-haired figure. "Kogan," Luffy snarled, spotting the admiral from the pyramid's entrance. Zoro narrowed his eye. "Something's off. Look who's with him." Beside Kogan, being led in sea stone handcuffs, was Aurora. She looked battered but defiant, her eyes scanning the ruins until they locked on Luffy. Even at this distance, he could see her expression shift from surprise to alarm. "They're using her to track us," Jinbe realized. "Probably forced her to lead them through the triangle." "Or they're using her as bait," Sanji suggested, lighting a fresh cigarette. Doesn't matter, Luffy said, already moving forward. We're getting her back. But before they could charge into battle, Aurora did something unexpected. She dropped to her knees, seemingly overwhelmed by weakness from the sea stone. Kogan turned to her impatiently, and in that moment of distraction, she suddenly surged upward, head-butting him with enough force to stagger even the admiral. Chaos erupted as she made a break for the pyramid, dodging marines with surprising agility despite her bound hands. Kogan recovered quickly, unleashing a wave of gravity that slowed her down but didn't stop her completely. Luffy, she shouted, her voice carrying across the battlefield. The temple. Destroy it. What? Luffy froze in confusion. But the poneglyph, trust me. Aurora managed another few steps before Kogan's power brought her crashing to the ground. Luffy hesitated only a second before turning to Zoro. Get Robin and the others out. Now. Zoro nodded, understanding immediately. He raced back into the pyramid while Luffy, Sanji, and Jinbe faced the approaching marines. What's the plan? Sanji asked, taking a battle stance. By time for the others, rescue Aurora, then destroy the temple, Luffy said, cracking his knuckles. Simple. Nothing's ever simple with you, Sanji muttered, but he was grinning. They charged into the fray, cutting through the marine ranks with practiced efficiency. Jinbe cleared a path with his fishman karate, sending soldiers flying with powerful water-infused strikes. Sanji's flaming kicks kept another group at bay, while Luffy headed straight for Kogan and Aurora. The admiral saw him coming and smiled coldly. Right on schedule, Straw Hat. Your mother was certain you'd come. Let her go, Luffy demanded, activating his gear second, steam rising from his skin. I think not, Kogan replied. The 5 elders are most interested in speaking with both of you. The last 2 carriers of that particular bloodline. Aurora, still pinned to the ground by Kogan's gravity, managed to lift her head. Luffy. The temple contains knowledge that can't fall into their hands. You have to destroy it. Silence. Kogan increased the gravity around her, driving her face into the dirt. Something in Luffy snapped at the sight. He launched forward, fist cocked back. Jumyu no Red Hawk. Kogan raised a hand, creating a gravity barrier, but Luffy's attack had enough momentum and power behind it to partially break through. The admiral slid backward, his boots leaving trenches in the ground. Impressive, Kogan acknowledged. You've grown stronger since Haven. You haven't seen anything yet, Luffy growled, shifting immediately into Gear 4th, his skin taking on the distinctive bounce man appearance. Meanwhile, Zoro had reached Robin, Nami, and Usopp inside the temple. We need to go, he said urgently. Luffy's orders, clear out so he can destroy this place. But the poneglyph. Robin protested. Did you copy it? She nodded, holding up her notebook. Most of it, but, then we're leaving, Zoro said firmly, cutting off further argument. Aurora told Luffy this place can't fall into the world government's hands. Reluctantly, Robin followed Zoro back toward the entrance, Nami and Usopp right behind them. As they emerged into daylight, they saw Luffy and Kogan engaged in a titanic struggle, their powers causing the very air to distort around them. Luffy was fighting with unusual intensity, his Gear 4th form allowing him to partially resist Kogan's gravity while delivering devastating blows. But the Admiral was no pushover. Each time Luffy seemed to gain an advantage, Kogan would shift the gravity in a new direction, keeping the young pirate off balance. Aurora, meanwhile, had somehow worked her sea stone handcuffs in front of her body and was struggling to her feet, her eyes fixed on something none of the others could see. She began staggering not toward the battle, but toward a different section of the ruins. Robin noticed first. She's going somewhere specific, she said, pointing. Cover her, Zoro decided, already moving to intercept Marines who had noticed Aurora's movement. The battlefield became increasingly chaotic as the remaining Straw Hats joined the fray. Frankie, Chopper, and Brooke arrived from the Sunny, having heard the commotion. Together, they formed a protective ring around Robin and her precious notebook while simultaneously clearing a path for Aurora's mysterious mission. Aurora reached what appeared to be a damaged pillar and fell to her knees before it, pressing her forehead against the stone as if in prayer. Then, to everyone's astonishment, the cuffs on her wrists began to crack, hairline fractures appearing in the sea stone. "That's impossible," Nami gasped. "Sea stone can't be broken like that." With a final effort, Aurora shattered the cuffs, fragments falling to the ground around her. She placed her now free hand on a symbol carved into the pillar, and a pulse of energy radiated outward, briefly visible as a ripple in the air. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The ground began to shake more violently than before. Cracks appeared in the ancient buildings, and the central pyramid started to collapse in on itself. "She's activated some kind of self-destruct mechanism," Robin realized. Kogan noticed too late. "No," he roared, momentarily distracted from his battle with Luffy. "Stop her." Luffy took advantage of the opening, connecting with a powerful Kong gun that sent the Admiral flying into a group of his own soldiers. Then he raced toward Aurora, who had collapsed beside the pillar, apparently exhausted by whatever she had done. He shouted, the word feeling strange but right on his lips. Aurora looked up at his approach, a weary smile spreading across her face. "You called me Mom," she said as he reached her. "Yeah," Luffy replied, kneeling beside her. "Guess I did." "We need to leave," she said urgently, struggling to stand. "This entire island is going to sink in minutes." Luffy supported her with one arm around her waist. "What did you do?" "Activated the ancient kingdom's final defense," she explained as they hurried toward the others. "This outpost contains too much dangerous knowledge. They built it to be destroyed if ever discovered by enemies." The Straw Hats regrouped, fighting their way back toward the shore as the island continued to disintegrate around them. Marines scrambled to return to their ships, the battle forgotten in the face of imminent destruction. Kogan, however, wasn't retreating. He pursued the Straw Hats relentlessly, his face contorted with rage. "The Poneglyph," he shouted. "Give me the archaeologist's notes." "Not happening." Luffy called back, helping Aurora along as the ground heaved beneath them. They reached the beach just as a massive section of the central pyramid collapsed. The Sunny was where they had left it, Frankie already firing up the engines. "Everyone aboard," Jinbe called, helping the others climb onto the ship. Aurora paused at the gangplank, looking back at the dying island with a mixture of sadness and determination. "Centuries of knowledge, lost again," she murmured. "Not all of it," Robin said, touching her notebook. "I saved what I could." Aurora's eyes widened in surprise, then she smiled. "Of course you did. You truly are Alvia's daughter." The moment of respite was brief. A wave of crushing gravity slammed into the Sunny, nearly capsizing it. Kogan stood on the beach, his power focused entirely on preventing their escape. "You will not leave with that knowledge," he roared, the veins in his temples standing out with effort. Aurora stepped forward, placing herself between Kogan and the ship. "Get ready to sail," she told Luffy quietly. "I'll handle this." "No." Luffy protested. "We just found you. I'm not losing you again." Aurora turned to him, her eyes soft but determined. "Trust me, Luffy. Please." Before he could argue further, she faced Kogan and took a stance Luffy had never seen before, feet planted wide, one hand extended palm outward, the other drawn back at her side. "Sovereign's will, dominion," she intoned, her voice resonating with strange power. The effect was immediate and astonishing. Kogan's gravity field wavered, then collapsed entirely. The Admiral staggered, shock evident on his face. "Impossible," he gasped. "You can't negate my devil fruit." "I'm not negating it," Aurora replied calmly. "I'm asserting a higher authority over it." She turned slightly toward the Sunny. Now. Go. Frankie didn't need to be told twice. The coup de burst fired, sending the ship rocketing into the air, safely away from Kogan's range. As they soared over the collapsing island, Luffy clung to the railing, watching Aurora grow smaller in the distance. At the last moment, she did something completely unexpected. She raised both arms, and suddenly she was flying, not stretching like Luffy or jumping, but actually flying through the air toward them. What the? Zoro started. Aurora landed gracefully on the Sunny's deck just as they splashed down into the sea beyond the island's reach. Behind them, the ancient outpost continued its collapse, sections disappearing beneath the waves. For a moment, everyone stared at Aurora in stunned silence. Then Luffy launched himself at her, wrapping his rubber arms around her in a tight hug. "You came," he exclaimed, his voice muffled against her shoulder. Aurora hesitated only briefly before returning the embrace, her arms encircling him with equal fervor. "Of course I did," she said softly. "I couldn't lose you again." Nami wiped away a tear, and even Zoro looked away, suddenly finding the horizon extremely interesting. The rest of the crew gave mother and son a moment, busying themselves with securing the ship and plotting a course away from the sinking island and pursuing Navy forces. Finally, Aurora gently disengaged from Luffy's embrace, keeping one hand on his shoulder as she addressed the crew. "Thank you all," she said, her voice steady but emotional. "For coming after me, for protecting the knowledge we found, and most of all, for being the family my son needed when I couldn't be there." "You don't need to thank us," Sanji said, offering her a gentle smile. "We're Nakama. It's what we do." Aurora nodded, then winced, one hand going to her side where a dark stain was spreading across her shirt. "You're hurt," Chopper exclaimed, immediately shifting to doctor mode. "Let me see." "It's nothing," she tried to dismiss, but her knees buckled. Luffy caught her before she could fall. "Chopper, help her." "Get her to the infirmary," Chopper ordered, already rushing ahead to prepare his medical equipment. As Luffy helped Aurora to the infirmary, the others exchanged worried glances. What was that power she used? Nami wondered. It completely neutralized an admiral's devil fruit. Robin opened her notebook, staring at the copied symbols from the golden poneglyph. "I think the answer might be in here," she said quietly. "Something called the Sovereign's lineage." "And what about that flying trick?" Frankie added. "That wasn't rubber powers like Luffy's." "I suspect," Robin said thoughtfully, "that we've only begun to uncover the mysteries surrounding the will of D." In the infirmary, Chopper worked quickly to treat Aurora's wounds. She had a deep gash in her side, likely from a sea stone blade, and numerous other injuries from her captivity. Luffy refused to leave her side, watching anxiously as Chopper cleaned, stitched, and bandaged. "She'll be okay," Chopper assured him once the worst was treated. "She just needs rest." Luffy nodded, pulling up a chair next to the bed where Aurora now lay, her breathing steady in sleep induced by Chopper's medicine. "I'll give you some privacy," the little doctor said, heading for the door. "Call me if anything changes." Alone with Aurora, Luffy studied her face. Now that he knew who she was, he could see the similarities between them, the shape of her jaw, the set of her eyes, even the way her brow furrowed slightly in sleep. "Why didn't you ever come find me?" he whispered, not expecting an answer from her unconscious form. To his surprise, her eyes fluttered open. "Because I was trying to protect you," she said weakly. "From what?" Aurora sighed, wincing as the movement pulled at her stitches. "From the knowledge I carry. From the burden of the D. From the world government that would kill a child to prevent our bloodline from continuing." "I don't understand," Luffy said, frustration evident in his voice. "What's so special about our bloodline? What does it have to do with the ancient kingdom?" Aurora's eyes, so like his own but more weathered by time and hardship, studied him carefully. "How much do you want to know, Luffy? The truth can't be unlearned." "Everything," he said without hesitation. "I want to know everything." She nodded slowly, as if she'd expected nothing less. Then I'll tell you. But not just you, your whole crew deserves to know. They've risked their lives for this truth. They can wait until you're stronger, Luffy said, surprising himself with his patience. Aurora smiled, reaching out to touch his face with a gentle hand. You've grown into such a good man. Your father would be proud. Her eyes drifted closed again, the medicine reclaiming her consciousness. So much like him. But your heart, that's all yours. As she slipped back into sleep, Luffy remained by her side, determined not to leave until she woke again. Outside the infirmary, the rest of the crew gathered, waiting for news. Robin had spread her notebook on the dining table, carefully reviewing her transcription of the golden poneglyph. The symbols seemed to shift and rearrange themselves in her vision, making translation difficult. It's almost as if it's protected, she murmured. Encoded somehow. Can you break the code? Nami asked, peering over her shoulder. Given time, perhaps. But, Robin stopped suddenly, her finger hovering over a particular sequence of symbols. Wait. This part here, it's talking about the origin of the D clan. The others gathered closer as Robin translated slowly, from the 20 kings came tyranny, but from the sovereign came hope. The bloodline of D, keepers of the ancient will, carriers of the dawn. In their veins flows the power that once ruled justly, now hidden until the promised day returns. The sovereign, Zoro repeated. Isn't that what Aurora called her power? Sovereign's will. Robin nodded, excitement building in her voice. And here, look, there's a description of abilities passed down through this bloodline. The power to impose one's will on reality itself, to command the elements, to nullify other powers. Like she did with Kogan's gravity, Sanji realized. But Luffy can't do any of that, Usopp pointed out. He's got rubber powers from his devil fruit. Robin frowned, scanning further down the text. There's something here about dilution. The power weakening over generations of hiding and intermarriage with those outside the bloodline. She looked up. I think the D clan's original abilities have grown weaker over time, and devil fruits became a way to supplement that lost power. So Aurora has more of this original power than Luffy? Frankie asked. Perhaps, Robin said. Or perhaps she's learned to access it in ways he hasn't yet discovered. Their discussion was interrupted by the infirmary door opening. Luffy emerged, looking tired but determined. She's sleeping again, he reported. Chopper says she'll recover. Did she tell you anything? Jinbe asked gently. Luffy shook his head. Not much. Just that she stayed away to protect me from something. From knowledge she has. He glanced at Robin's notebook. Did you figure anything out from that? Robin hesitated, then shared what she'd translated. As she explained about the sovereign's lineage and the original powers of the D clan, Luffy's expression grew increasingly thoughtful. So that's why she can do things I can't, he said when Robin finished. She's tapped into this, original D power. It seems so, Robin confirmed. But there's more to translate. The poneglyph mentioned something called the awakening, apparently a process by which those with diluted bloodlines can reclaim their heritage. Luffy nodded slowly, processing this information. Then, with characteristic simplicity, he said, doesn't matter. Devil fruit or ancient blood power, I'm still gonna be king of the pirates. His straightforward response broke the tension, drawing smiles and even a laugh from his crew. Whatever mysteries Aurora's appearance had introduced, Luffy remained fundamentally himself. What now, Captain? Zoro asked. We wait for her to wake up, Luffy decided. Then we figure out our next move. The Navy's still after her, and now they're definitely after us too. More than usual, you mean, Nami sighed. As if on cue, the lookout den mushi that Usopp had rigged began to ring. Ships approaching from the east. Brook's voice announced from the crow's nest. They rushed to the deck, telescopes trained on the horizon. Sure enough, sails had appeared, but not Navy battleships. "Those are Revolutionary Army ships," Jinbe identified, his experienced eye recognizing the unmarked vessels. "What are they doing here?" Sanji wondered. The answer came sooner than expected. As the ships drew closer, a familiar figure became visible on the lead vessel's deck, a tall man in a hooded cloak, his face partially obscured but unmistakable to Luffy. "Dad," he whispered, stunned by this unexpected development. Monkey D. Dragon, the world's most wanted man and leader of the Revolutionary Army, had come in person. And Luffy had a pretty good idea why. The revolutionary ships pulled alongside the Sunny, and without ceremony or permission, Dragon leapt across the gap between vessels, landing lightly on the Straw Hat's deck. His intense gaze immediately found Luffy. "Where is she?" he asked, his voice deep and commanding. "Resting," Luffy replied, standing his ground. "She was hurt." Something flickered in Dragon's eyes, concern, perhaps even fear. It was a strange expression to see on the face of the man known as the world's most dangerous criminal. "Take me to her," he said, and though it was phrased as a command, there was a plea beneath the words. Luffy studied his father for a long moment. They had met briefly in Logtown years ago, and again during the chaos at Marineford, but had never really spoken. Now, with Aurora's appearance connecting them in a new way, Luffy found himself seeing Dragon differently, not as the legendary revolutionary, but as a man worried about someone he cared for. "This way," Luffy said finally, turning toward the infirmary. As father and son disappeared below deck, the rest of the crew was left to deal with the Revolutionary Army officers who had followed their leader aboard. Tension hung in the air until Robin stepped forward. "Perhaps we should discuss what happened at the ancient outpost," she suggested diplomatically. "And what we learned from the Golden Poneglyph." One of the revolutionaries, a woman with short green hair, looked surprised. "You found the Sovereign's record? And you can read it?" Robin nodded. "Parts of it. Other sections appear to be encoded." "Aurora would be able to decode it," the woman said. "She's been studying the ancient language longer than anyone except the 5 elders themselves." Meanwhile, in the infirmary, Dragon stood silently beside Aurora's bed, looking down at her sleeping form with an unreadable expression. Luffy watched from the doorway, questions burning in his throat. Finally, he couldn't hold back any longer. "You knew," he said, keeping his voice low to avoid disturbing Chopper, who was checking Aurora's vital signs. "You knew she was my mother all along." Dragon didn't look up. "Yes. And you never told me." It wasn't quite an accusation, but close. Now Dragon did turn to face his son. "It was her decision to stay hidden. I honored it, even though I disagreed." "Why? Why would she abandon her own kid?" Dragon's normally impassive face showed a flash of anger. "She didn't abandon you. Never say that." He took a breath, regaining his composure. "Aurora made the hardest choice a mother can make, to stay away from her child to protect him." "From what?" Luffy demanded, his frustration mounting. "Everyone keeps saying she was protecting me, but from what?" "From the fate of every other child of D who showed signs of the Sovereign's lineage," Dragon replied grimly. "They don't live to adulthood, Luffy. The world government makes sure of it." This stopped Luffy cold. "What?" "The 5 elders have maintained their power for 800 years by systematically eliminating anyone who might carry too much of the ancient bloodline," Dragon explained. "Children who display certain abilities are quietly removed, accidents, sudden illnesses, mysterious disappearances. But I have the initial D," Luffy pointed out. "Many do. The bloodline is widespread now, diluted through centuries of hiding and intermarriage. Most D carriers pose no threat to the world government, they may have unusual willpower or charisma, but nothing more." Dragon glanced at Aurora. "But occasionally, a child is born with more potent inheritance. Aurora is one such person. And she feared you might be another." Luffy tried to process this. So she left me with Grandpa to hide me? Dragon nodded. Garp agreed to raise you as his grandson, with no mention of your mother. Your rubber powers from the devil fruit actually helped. The world government assumed any unusual abilities you displayed came from that, not your bloodline. Does Grandpa know who she really is? Yes. He and Aurora have a complicated relationship. But he respected her decision, even though it pained him to keep the truth from you. Before Luffy could ask more questions, Aurora stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She looked first at Dragon, a soft smile spreading across her face. You came, she said weakly. Of course I came, he replied, his usually harsh voice gentler than Luffy had ever heard it. You activated the beacon. Had to, she murmured. Kogan found the outpost. We destroyed it, but... Her eyes shifted to Luffy. He knows now. About me. Dragon nodded. It was inevitable. Aurora reached out, and Dragon took her hand without hesitation. The gesture was so unexpectedly tender that Luffy felt like an intruder witnessing it. Are you too? He started, then trailed off, unsure how to finish the question. Aurora's laugh was weak but genuine. Complicated, she said, echoing Dragon's earlier description of her relationship with Garp. Your father and I have a long history, Luffy. We've fought together, disagreed bitterly, separated, found each other again. But you never married, Luffy said, trying to understand. Dragon's expression darkened. The world government has ways of tracking legal unions. It would have endangered you both. So we chose a different path, Aurora added. I focused on preserving the ancient knowledge and helping refugees from government purges. Dragon built the revolutionary army to challenge the system directly. And I ended up with Grandpa, Luffy concluded, a note of bitterness creeping into his voice despite his best efforts. Aurora's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry, Luffy. So sorry. Not a day went by that I didn't think of you, wonder about you, miss you. She kept track of you, Dragon said quietly. Every bounty poster, every news article. She has a collection. I was so proud when you set out to sea, Aurora continued, wiping away tears. When you declared war on the world government for Robin's sake. When you liberated Dressrosa, Fishman Island, Wano. You were watching me? Luffy asked, something warm and complicated unfolding in his chest. Always, Aurora confirmed. From a distance, to keep you safe. Until now. The three of them fell silent, the weight of 20 years of separation hanging in the air between them. Outside, they could hear the muffled voices of the crew and the revolutionaries, apparently engaged in lively discussion. What happens now? Luffy finally asked. Dragon and Aurora exchanged a look that contained an entire conversation. Then Aurora sighed. Now we prepare, she said. Kogan will report what happened at the outpost. The 5 elders will know that you've discovered your heritage. They'll come for you with everything they have. Let them come, Luffy said with characteristic confidence. I'm not afraid of them. You should be, Dragon said bluntly. Not for your sake, but for your crew's. The world government won't just send admirals now, they'll deploy the SSG, the Cypher Pole's top agents, perhaps even the elders' personal guard. Then we'll fight them too, Luffy insisted. Aurora smiled sadly. So much like your father. Always ready to charge headfirst into impossible battles. She squeezed Dragon's hand, then released it to reach for Luffy's. But this time, you won't fight alone. It's time I stopped hiding in the shadows. What are you saying? Dragon asked, his brow furrowing. I'm saying our son needs us, Aurora replied simply. Both of us. The knowledge I've gathered, the army you've built, it's time to use them. You're talking about moving up the timetable, Dragon said, looking troubled. We're not ready for open warfare. We may not have a choice, Aurora countered. The ancient texts speak of signs preceding the dawn, the meeting of the sovereign bloodline with the ancient weapons, the uncovering of the truth of the void century, the gathering of the scattered tribes. She looked meaningfully at Luffy. Your son has been fulfilling prophecies without even knowing it. Poseidon awakened to his call. Zo revealed itself to him. The minks, the samurai of Wano, the giants of Elbath, all have allied with him. Dragon's expression grew thoughtful. You believe it's beginning. The dawn the ancient kingdom foretold. I do, Aurora said firmly. And I believe Luffy is at the center of it. Luffy, who had been following this exchange with growing confusion, finally interrupted. What are you two talking about? What prophecies? Aurora turned to him, her eyes intense. The reason the world government erased the void century from history, Luffy. The promise that a descendant of the ancient sovereign would one day return, unite the scattered allies, and bring down the false kings who have ruled through lies and fear for 8 centuries. And you think that's me? Luffy asked incredulously. I don't know, Aurora admitted. But you've already accomplished things no one thought possible. You've gathered allies from races and kingdoms that have been enemies for generations. You've challenged the world government repeatedly and survived. But I just want to be the pirate king, Luffy said, his brow furrowed. I'm not trying to fulfill some ancient prophecy or overthrow the government. Dragon's laugh was unexpected, a short, sharp sound rarely heard. And that, he said, may be exactly why it has to be you. Those who seek power for its own sake are corrupted by it. You seek freedom, for yourself and others. Aurora nodded in agreement. The ancient texts describe the true sovereign not as one who desires to rule, but as one who breaks chains and returns what was stolen. Luffy shook his head, overwhelmed by the weight of their expectations. This is too much. I just wanted to find my mom, not get involved in some ancient destiny stuff. Aurora's expression softened. I understand, Luffy. And I'm sorry to burden you with this. She reached up to touch his face. If you want me to go, to keep this danger away from you and your crew, I will. It would break my heart, but I would do it. No. Luffy's response was immediate and forceful. I just found you. I'm not letting you disappear again. Relief washed over Aurora's face. Then we'll face whatever comes together. As a family. Dragon, who had been watching this exchange with uncharacteristic emotion in his eyes, placed a hand on Luffy's shoulder. Your crew should be part of this discussion. They've earned that right. Luffy nodded, grateful for the suggestion. I'll get them. When he left to gather his friends, Dragon turned to Aurora. You didn't tell him everything. No, she agreed quietly. Some burdens can wait. Let him absorb this much first. Dragon's hand found hers again. And us? What do we tell him about us? Aurora's smile was tinged with old sadness. The truth, as much as we can. He deserves that much. When Luffy returned with his crew, he found his parents sitting side by side, Aurora propped up against pillows, looking stronger than before. The sight of them together struck him anew, the world's most wanted revolutionary and the scholar who had escaped destruction at O'Hara, united by purpose and by him. The infirmary was crowded with the entire Straw Hat crew plus Dragon, but no one suggested moving to a larger space. There was something intimate and necessary about gathering here, around Aurora's sickbed, as she prepared to share secrets kept hidden for centuries. Before I begin, Aurora said, looking at each face in turn, I want to thank you all. Not just for helping rescue me, but for being the family Luffy needed. For believing in him, following him, protecting him when I couldn't. We didn't do it for you, Zoro said bluntly. We did it because he's our captain. Rather than taking offense, Aurora smiled. Good. Loyalty freely given is the only kind worth having. She shifted, wincing slightly at the pain from her wounds. What I'm about to tell you puts you all in danger. More danger than you've ever faced. If any of you wish to leave before hearing it, no one would blame you. The Straw Hats exchanged glances, then looked to Luffy, who stood at the foot of the bed, arms crossed. "We're not going anywhere," Nami declared, speaking for all of them. "We've followed Luffy into Sea King's bellies and Marine headquarters. Whatever this is, we'll face it together." Aurora nodded, unsurprised but clearly moved by their solidarity. "Very well. Then I'll tell you the true history that the world government has spent 8 centuries trying to erase. The origin of the will of D, the nature of the ancient weapons, and why the 5 elders fear the return of the sovereign's lineage above all else." And so, as the Sunny sailed through the dangerous waters of the Devil's Triangle, guided by revolutionary ships flanking them protectively, Aurora began a tale that rewrote everything they thought they knew about the world. She spoke of the ancient kingdom, a civilization founded on principles of knowledge and freedom, ruled not by kings who inherited their thrones but by sovereigns who earned the right to lead through wisdom and strength of will. She described technologies far beyond anything in the current era, ships that could sail beneath the waves, devices that could speak across vast distances, weapons that could reshape islands or destroy them utterly. The ancient weapons we know of today, Pluton, Poseidon, Uranus, were never meant for war, she explained. They were created as tools for building, for connecting the world, for protection against natural disasters. But like all tools, they could be turned to destruction in the wrong hands. She told of how 20 kings, jealous of the ancient kingdom's prosperity and fearful of its growing influence, formed an alliance and declared war. The conflict lasted 20 years, devastating much of the world. The ancient kingdom could have used their weapons to annihilate their enemies, Aurora continued. But their sovereign refused, believing that victory through such means would corrupt their own civilization beyond recovery. Instead, they developed a different strategy. They would scatter their knowledge, their people, and their treasures across the world, preserving them until a time when humanity was ready for such power again. Robin leaned forward, entranced. "The poneglyphs." Aurora nodded. "Yes. Indestructible messages left for future generations. But also bloodlines, families entrusted with specific knowledge or abilities, instructed to preserve them in secret until the promised day of return." "The D clan," Luffy said. "Not just one clan," Aurora corrected. "Many. The D bloodline was special, descendants of the sovereign family itself, carriers of unique abilities. But there were others. The 3 ancient weapons were each entrusted to different lineages." She looked at Robin. "The scholars of O'Hara were descendants of the ancient kingdom's archivists, tasked with preserving historical knowledge." Robin's eyes widened. "That's why the world government destroyed O'Hara. Not just because we could read poneglyphs, but because of who we descended from." "Exactly," Aurora confirmed. "The 20 kings who formed the world government knew they couldn't completely eradicate all traces of the ancient kingdom. So instead, they embarked on a campaign of systematic suppression, hunting down bloodlines, destroying records, rewriting history to cast themselves as the saviors of civilization rather than its conquerors." She went on to explain how, over centuries, the truth became fragmented and distorted. The scattered tribes and races who had been allies of the ancient kingdom, giants, minks, fishmen, sky people, became isolated, often turning against each other, forgetting their common heritage. "But not everything was forgotten," Aurora said, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "The will of D persisted, passed down through generations. Most who carry the initial don't know its significance, only that they should be proud of it, that it marks them as different in some way. So what does the D actually stand for?" Usopp asked the question they'd all wondered about. Aurora and Dragon exchanged a glance. "Dawn," Dragon answered. "It stands for dawn. The promise of a new day after the long night of the world government's rule. That's why those with the initial D often smile at death," Aurora added. "The ancient teaching was that death is not the end but merely part of the cycle, the darkness before the dawn." "But you said most D carriers don't have special powers," Sanji pointed out. "What makes some different?" "Bloodline concentration," Aurora explained. Over centuries of hiding, the sovereign bloodline became diluted through intermarriage with ordinary families, a necessary step for survival. But occasionally, through chance or fate, children are born with a stronger connection to those original powers. Like you, Chopper said. Aurora nodded. My mother was AD, as was her mother before her. My father came from a family with links to ancient Alabasta, whose royal line had their own connections to the ancient kingdom. The combination resulted in a stronger manifestation of the sovereign abilities. And Luffy? Nami asked. Dragon's bloodline is powerful in its own right, Aurora said, glancing at her son's father. The monkey family has produced individuals of exceptional will for generations, though they've often served within the system rather than opposing it. She smiled slightly. Your grandfather is a prime example, Luffy. His incredible strength and mastery of Haki aren't just from training, they're in his blood. Luffy thought of Garp's monstrous power, his ability to punch even Logia users without Haki being visible. So Grandpa has this sovereign power too? A fraction of it, Dragon said. Enough to make him exceptional among Marines, but not enough to raise suspicions about his heritage. Which brings us to you, Luffy, Aurora continued. When you were born, I sensed the potential in you, stronger than in most D children I'd encountered. That's why I made the decision to leave you with Garp, to hide you in plain sight. But then I ate the Gomu Gomu no Mi, Luffy said, beginning to understand. Aurora nodded. Which turned out to be providential. Your rubber abilities masked your natural talents, making them appear to be side effects of the fruit rather than inherited traits. Wait, Frankie interjected. Are you saying Luffy's incredible willpower, his conqueror's Haki, his ability to make allies everywhere he goes, those aren't just his personality, but actual inherited powers? Both, Dragon answered before Aurora could. The potential is inherited, but how it manifests depends on the individual's personality and choices. Luffy uses his abilities the way he does because of who he is, not just what he was born with. The sovereign's lineage doesn't guarantee anything, Aurora elaborated. It merely provides possibilities. Pathways that others don't have access to. What you do with those pathways is entirely your own choice. Robin had been quiet for some time, clearly processing everything she was hearing. Now she spoke up. The golden poneglyph mentioned something called the Awakening. Is that related to what you can do, negating Admiral Kogan's devil fruit, flying without wings? Aurora's expression grew more serious. Yes. The Awakening is the process by which those with diluted sovereign blood can reclaim more of their heritage. It requires specific circumstances, training, and often great personal sacrifice. You've undergone this awakening, Robin surmised. Partially, Aurora admitted. It's not a single event but a gradual unfolding. Each ability that reawakens requires its own catalyst, its own moment of need or revelation. Luffy, who had been unusually quiet throughout this explanation, finally spoke. Can I learn to do what you do? To fly, to stop devil fruits. Aurora studied him thoughtfully. Your path would be different from mine, Luffy. You already have a devil fruit, which complicates matters. The Gomu Gomu no Mi has integrated with your life force, becoming part of you in ways that might limit certain sovereign abilities while enhancing others. But it's possible, Luffy pressed. Yes, Aurora said carefully. It's possible. With the right guidance, the right circumstances. She trailed off, then added softly, but it's dangerous, Luffy. Each awakening brings you closer to your heritage, makes you more of a threat in the world government's eyes. It's why I've hidden my own abilities for so long, using them only when absolutely necessary. I'm already a threat in their eyes, Luffy pointed out. Have been since Enies lobby. Dragon chuckled. He has a point. Aurora shot him a look that suggested this was an old argument between them. There's a difference between being a troublesome pirate and being recognized as a potential sovereign. The former they hunt, the latter they annihilate, along with everyone associated with them. The sobering statement hung in the air. The straw hats exchanged glances, absorbing the magnitude of what they were potentially facing. That's why the world government has been increasingly aggressive in recent years, Jinbe observed. The emergence of powerful pirates, the formation of new alliances, the rediscovery of ancient weapons, they see the signs of what's coming. Yes, Dragon confirmed. Their intelligence isn't what it once was, but they recognize patterns. That's why the Revolutionary Army has been working more openly, drawing their attention away from other developments. He looked at his son. Like a certain pirate crew systematically dismantling the power structures the world government relies on. We weren't trying to do that, Luffy protested. We were just helping our friends. Aurora smiled. And that, Luffy, is exactly what the ancient texts describe. The true sovereign acts not from desire for power but from bonds of loyalty and love. Luffy frowned, uncomfortable with the weight of these expectations. I'm still just going to be the Pirate King. All this ancient prophecy stuff doesn't change that. Perhaps becoming Pirate King is part of the prophecy, Robin suggested. After all, what is the One Piece if not the greatest legacy of the previous era? This caught Aurora's attention. You figured it out, she asked, looking genuinely surprised. Robin shook her head. Not entirely. But I've pieced together enough to suspect that the One Piece is somehow connected to the ancient kingdom's final plan, their method for eventually restoring what was lost. You're closer than you know, Aurora said quietly. But that's a discussion for another time. She looked exhausted now, the extended conversation clearly taxing her still recovering body. Chopper noticed immediately. That's enough for today, he said firmly. Aurora needs rest. No one argued, though it was clear they all had more questions. As the crew filed out of the infirmary, Dragon lingered, as did Luffy. We should reach the sanctuary by morning, Dragon told Aurora. You'll be safer there, and we can plan our next moves. Aurora nodded, her eyes already growing heavy. Stay with me, she asked softly. Dragon's normally stern expression softened. He pulled a chair close to her bed and sat, taking her hand in his. Always. Luffy watched this quiet moment between his parents, feeling like an intruder yet unable to leave. There was something both strange and profoundly right about seeing them together, these two people who had shaped his existence in such different ways, one from afar, the other from absence. You should rest too, Luffy, Dragon said, not unkindly. Tomorrow will bring new challenges. Luffy hesitated. Will you still be here? When I wake up? The question was directed at both of them, and both understood the fear beneath it, that they might disappear from his life again. Yes, Aurora promised, fighting to keep her eyes open. We have so much lost time to make up for. I'll stay as long as I can, Dragon added, more measured but no less sincere. Some matters require my attention, but I won't vanish without saying goodbye. It was enough for now. Luffy nodded and turned to go, pausing at the door for one last look at the parents he'd never known he had. They were both watching him, their expressions a complex mixture of pride, regret, and hope. Good night, he said simply, and closed the door behind him. Outside, he found Zoro waiting, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. Lot to take in, the swordsman commented. Luffy nodded. Yeah. Changed anything for you? All this talk about ancient bloodlines and prophecies. Luffy considered the question, then grinned. Nope. Still gonna be king of the pirates. Zoro laughed. Figured as much. He pushed off from the wall. The others are waiting in the galley. Sanji made midnight snacks. Food. Luffy's mood instantly brightened, and he headed for the galley at a near run. Zoro watched him go, shaking his head with a fond smile. No matter what revelations came their way, some things never changed, and that, perhaps, was their greatest strength. In the galley, the crew had gathered around the table, an unusual quiet hanging over them as they processed everything they'd learned. When Luffy burst in, his usual exuberance restored at the prospect of food, the tension broke. "There he is," Sanji said, already preparing a plate piled high with meat. "Thought you might be hungry after all that." Luffy grabbed the plate and began devouring its contents. Between mouthfuls, he noticed his friends exchanging glances. "What?" he asked, cheeks bulging. "Nothing," Nami said quickly. "We were just wondering how you're feeling. About all of this." Luffy swallowed. "About my mom? Or about the whole descended from ancient kings thing?" "Both, I guess," Usopp said. Luffy shrugged. "The mom part is cool. Weird, but cool. She seems strong. And she knows a lot of stuff." He took another massive bite. "The rest of it? I don't know. Doesn't change what we're doing, does it?" The simplicity of his response lightened the mood considerably. Leave it to Luffy to reduce world-changing revelations to their practical essence. "I suppose it doesn't," Robin agreed, smiling slightly. "Though it does add context to many of our adventures. Like why the world government has been so determined to stop us," Jinbe noted. "Or why Luffy can make friends with literally anyone," Nami added. "Or convince people to follow him into certain death," Usopp muttered, though there was fondness in his complaint. Luffy finished his plate and reached for more. "I don't need some special blood to do any of that stuff," he said between bites. "I do it because you're my friends and I want to have adventures together." "And that," Brook said softly, "is precisely why you can do it, Luffy-san. Your heart is true, regardless of your heritage." The conversation drifted to lighter topics after that, speculation about the Revolutionary Army's sanctuary, plans for the Sunny's repairs, Sanji's ideas for meals that might help Aurora recover faster. By the time they all headed to bed, the mood had normalized somewhat, though a current of anticipation ran beneath the surface. Tomorrow would bring new revelations, new dangers, and perhaps new powers. But tonight, they were still the Straw Hat Pirates, bound not by prophecy or bloodline but by choice and loyalty. And for Luffy, drifting off to sleep in his hammock, that was all that really mattered. Morning brought clear skies and the first sight of their destination, a massive, jagged island rising from the sea like the spine of some ancient beast. Unlike Haven, this sanctuary made no attempt to hide its defenses. Watchtowers dotted the cliffs, and the narrow approach to the harbor was guarded by heavy artillery partially concealed among the rocks. "Impressive," Frankie commented, studying the fortifications with professional interest. "They've incorporated the natural terrain into their defensive systems." Dragon had joined them on deck as they approached. "This is New Baltigo," he explained. "After the destruction of our previous headquarters, we decided a more robust approach was necessary." "It looks like you're expecting war," Robin observed. Dragon's expression remained impassive. "We always are." The Sunny was guided into the harbor by revolutionary ships, eventually docking at a pier carved directly into the stone. As they disembarked, Luffy noticed the diversity of the people working around the port, not just humans but fishmen, giants, even a few minks. All wore variations of Revolutionary Army uniforms, modified to suit their different physiologies. Aurora had recovered enough to walk, though she leaned slightly on Dragon's arm as they descended to the pier. She wore fresh clothes provided by the revolutionaries, practical battle gear similar to what she'd had at Haven, but with subtle insignia that marked her as someone of high rank. "Welcome to New Baltigo," she said to the Straw Hats. "One of the few truly safe places left in the world for those the world government considers enemies." They were led through a series of tunnels cut into the living rock of the island, eventually emerging into a vast cavern that had been transformed into what could only be described as a small city. Buildings of stone and wood were arranged in concentric circles around a central plaza. People moved purposefully in all directions, carrying supplies, weapons, and documents. "The Revolutionary Army has grown," Jinbe observed, clearly impressed by the operation. "Necessity," Dragon replied. The world government's policies have created more refugees, more dissidents, more people with nothing left to lose. We give them purpose. And protection, Aurora added, gesturing to a section of the cavern where children played under the watchful eyes of caretakers. Many here are families of those the world government has executed or imprisoned. They were taken to a large building near the center of the cavern city. Inside, a circular room awaited them, dominated by a massive table map of the world. Around it stood several individuals the Straw Hats recognized from previous encounters, Dragon's top commanders. You know Koala and Sabo, Dragon said, nodding to the former slave and Luffy's sworn brother, who both smiled in greeting. This is Karasu, Morley, Lindbergh, and Bello Betty, our regional commanders. Introductions were made quickly, with Sabo pulling Luffy into a tight hug. Why am I not surprised you're in the middle of this? He laughed. Because he's always in the middle of everything, Koala answered for him, smiling warmly at the Straw Hats. It's good to see you all again, though I wish the circumstances were better. Aurora had settled into a chair, still weakened from her injuries. Have there been any reports of Kogan's movements since the island's destruction? She asked, immediately focused on business. He returned directly to Mariewa, Karasu reported, his voice muffled by his mask. Our sources indicate he met with the 5 elders immediately upon arrival. Then they know, Aurora said grimly. About Luffy, about the Sovereign's record, about all of it. We've already increased security at all sanctuaries, Betty informed her. And evacuated the smaller ones as a precaution. It won't be enough, Aurora said, shaking her head. Not if they deploy the SSG in force. Dragon frowned. You believe they'll go that far? I know they will, Aurora replied with certainty. The existence of a potential sovereign is the one thing they fear above all else. They'll burn the world to prevent the prophecy from coming to pass. Then we accelerate our timetable, Dragon decided, turning to his commanders. Activate all cells. Contact our allies in the pirate territories, the neutral kingdoms, the tribal nations. The time for hiding is over. The commanders nodded, clearly having expected this order. Only Sabo looked troubled. The alliance with Wano is still new, he pointed out. And Alabasta remains vulnerable after the recent coup attempt. Are we sure they're ready for open conflict? No one is ever truly ready for war, Sabo, Dragon replied. But sometimes it comes regardless of readiness. Aurora caught Luffy watching this exchange with a deepening frown. You disagree? She asked him directly. Luffy crossed his arms. You're talking about dragging a bunch of people into a fight they didn't ask for. People who just want to live their lives. The world government has never allowed them that luxury, Karasu countered. Even those who think they're free are merely experiencing a longer leash. Still their choice, Luffy insisted. You can't decide for them. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Then, unexpectedly, Dragon laughed, a short, sharp sound that startled everyone. He's right, the revolutionary leader said, looking at his son with something like pride. We've become so accustomed to operating in secrecy that we've begun to mirror our enemies' methods. He turned to his commanders. Contact our allies, yes, but present the situation honestly. Let them choose their level of involvement. Aurora smiled slightly. And this, she said quietly, is why the prophecy speaks of the sovereign as one who leads by example, not by command. Luffy shifted uncomfortably at the reference to the prophecy. I'm not leading anybody into anything. I just want to help my mom and keep sailing with my crew. Then perhaps that should be our immediate focus, Robin suggested diplomatically. Aurora's safety and the knowledge she carries. Agreed, Dragon said. Aurora, you should complete Luffy's briefing. He needs to understand everything now, especially about the awakening. Aurora nodded slowly. Yes, it's time. She looked around at the assembled revolutionaries. But privately, I think. Some knowledge is still best kept among few. Dragon gestured to his commanders, who took the hint and began filing out. Sabo lingered, clearly reluctant to leave Luffy, but eventually followed the others. Soon only Dragon, Aurora, and the Straw Hats remained. What I'm about to tell you, Aurora began once they were alone, is known only to a handful of people in the world. Some of it was preserved in the Sovereign's record, but much has been passed down orally through generations of the D bloodline. She stood, moving to a cabinet against the wall. From it, she withdrew a small wooden box, intricately carved with symbols similar to those on the poneglyphs. Returning to the table, she placed the box before Luffy. "Open it," she instructed softly. Luffy looked at the box warily, then at his mother. At her encouraging nod, he reached for it. The moment his fingers touched the wood, the symbols began to glow with a faint blue light, the same phenomenon they had witnessed at the temple door. "It recognizes your bloodline," Aurora explained. Luffy lifted the lid. Inside lay a single object, a bracelet made of some strange, translucent material that seemed to shift colors as the light hit it. He lifted it carefully, finding it unexpectedly light in his hand. "What is it?" he asked, turning it to examine the intricate patterns etched into its surface. "A key," Aurora answered. "To unlocking the dormant abilities in your blood." "A devil fruit user can't have two powers," Robin pointed out, looking concerned. "This isn't a devil fruit power," Aurora clarified. "It's older, more fundamental. The ancient kingdom understood that certain abilities were inherent to all living beings, merely dormant in most. They developed methods to awaken these latent powers, particularly in their sovereign lineage." "Like Haki?" Zoro asked. "Haki is one manifestation of these abilities," Aurora confirmed. "But there are others, the power to sense and influence the elements, to perceive connections between living things, to assert one's will upon reality itself." "That sounds impossible," Nami said skeptically. Aurora smiled. "No more impossible than a fruit granting the power to create earthquakes or control time. The difference is that devil fruits were created as shortcuts, artificial means of accessing powers that the ancient kingdom believed should come through training and spiritual development." Luffy was still examining the bracelet. "So what does this do, exactly?" "It's a focus," Aurora explained. "A tool to help channel your innate abilities. Wearing it won't immediately grant you new powers, but it will make them more accessible as you learn to use them." "And you want me to put this on?" Luffy asked, looking uncertain. Aurora's expression grew serious. "I won't lie to you, Luffy. Awakening your heritage carries risks. It will make you a more visible target for the world government. It may change how your devil fruit interacts with your body. And the process itself can be painful. Then why should he do it at all?" Nami demanded protectively. "Because he may need these abilities to survive what's coming," Dragon answered from where he stood by the window. "The five elders won't send ordinary forces against him now. They'll deploy weapons and warriors specifically designed to counter devil fruit users. And because it's his birthright," Aurora added softly. "These powers are part of who Luffy is, who he was born to be. I've denied him that knowledge his entire life. I won't deny him the choice now." Luffy looked from the bracelet to his crew, seeing their concern, then to his parents. Finally, his gaze settled on Aurora. "You can do this too? These sovereign powers?" She nodded. "Some of them. Each D-carrier manifests different aspects of the heritage. Some develop enhanced Haki, others elemental affinities, others still the ability to connect with and lead others." "And the flying? The thing you did to Kogan's powers?" "Specialized applications," Aurora explained. "The flight is an extension of moonwalk, but sustainable. The nullification of devil fruits is complicated. It's not that I cancel the power itself, but rather assert a prior claim on the natural laws the fruit is attempting to manipulate." Luffy's brow furrowed as he tried to process this. Then, with characteristic decisiveness, he simply slipped the bracelet onto his wrist. Okay, let's try it. Luffy. Nami protested. You don't even know what it's going to do. He shrugged. Mom says it's part of who I am. I want to know what that means. The moment the bracelet settled against his skin, Luffy gasped. The material seemed to pulse once, then began to glow with the same blue light as the symbols on the box. The glow spread up his arm in intricate patterns that resembled both veins and the symbols from the ancient kingdom. What's happening to him? Chopper asked anxiously, moving closer in doctor mode. The awakening has begun, Aurora said, watching intently. The bracelet is resonating with his bloodline, activating dormant pathways. Luffy's eyes widened as strange sensations washed through him. It wasn't painful, exactly, but intensely disorienting, as if parts of him that had been asleep his entire life were suddenly waking up. I can feel everything, he whispered. The air, the stone, the ocean outside, it's all connected. That's the first stage, Aurora said, nodding. Awareness. Your consciousness expanding beyond your physical body. The glowing patterns had spread across Luffy's chest now, visible even through his shirt. His breathing quickened, and sweat beaded on his forehead. Now it's starting to hurt, he admitted, grimacing. Your body is adjusting, Aurora explained, moving to his side and placing a steadying hand on his shoulder. The pathways have been dormant for too long. Opening them is painful, but temporary. Luffy nodded, gritting his teeth. The Straw Hats watched anxiously as the glow continued to spread, eventually encompassing his entire body. When it reached his eyes, they flashed brilliant blue for an instant, then returned to normal. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the glow faded. The bracelet remained on his wrist but now appeared to be part of him, almost like a tattoo rather than a physical object. Is it over? Usopp asked hesitantly. Aurora shook her head. Just beginning. The pathways are open now, but learning to use them will take time and practice. Luffy looked down at his hands, which appeared normal again. I don't feel that different. You won't, until you learn to access the abilities consciously, Aurora said. For now, the most noticeable change will likely be in your haki. It should be more responsive, more intuitive. As if to test this, Luffy activated his armament haki. The usual black coating appeared on his arm, but there was something different about it, a subtle blue iridescence that hadn't been there before. Cool, Zoro commented, studying the effect with interest. Try your Conqueror's haki, Dragon suggested. But carefully. Directed at this. He placed an empty glass on the table. Luffy frowned in concentration, focusing on the glass. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the glass shuddered and cracked neatly down the middle, not shattering as if from pressure, but splitting as if obeying a command. Whoa, Luffy breathed, surprised by the precision of the effect. That's the beginning of will imposition, Aurora explained. The ability to affect objects with your haki, not just people or elements. Could be useful in a fight, Sanji observed. It's more than that, Robin said thoughtfully. If he can impose his will on objects with that level of control. It has many applications, Aurora agreed. Both in combat and beyond. Luffy was already experimenting further, directing his focus at a pencil on the table. It rolled toward him without being touched, stopping when it reached his hand. This is awesome, he exclaimed, his initial discomfort forgotten in the excitement of discovery. Dragon and Aurora exchanged a look that mixed pride with concern. Remember what I said about discretion, Aurora cautioned. Using these abilities openly will draw attention we may not be ready for. Right, Luffy agreed absently, now trying to make multiple pencils move simultaneously. A knock at the door interrupted further experimentation. Koala entered, her expression serious. Sorry to interrupt, she said, but we've received an urgent communication. Admiral Kogan has been given command of a special task force. Their mission parameters include the capture of Aurora and She hesitated, glancing at Luffy, the elimination of Monkey D. Luffy. The playful atmosphere evaporated instantly. Dragon's face darkened. How soon? They're already at sea, Koala reported grimly. 5 battleships, 3 SSG vessels, and Kogan's flagship. ETA to our location, approximately 3 days. How did they find us so quickly? Jinbe wondered. Aurora's expression was grim. They must have placed a tracker on me during my captivity. Something undetectable, perhaps subcutaneous. Chopper looked alarmed. I should examine you immediately. Later, Dragon said, already moving toward the door. First, we need to prepare our defenses. He looked at Luffy. And you need to accelerate your training. 3 days isn't much time, but it might be enough to master the basics. I'll work with him, Aurora promised, standing despite her lingering weakness. We'll focus on the abilities most useful in combating Kogan's gravity powers. As the room erupted into activity, Luffy remained oddly calm, looking down at the bracelet that had now become part of him. He could feel something stirring in his blood, an awareness, a potential that had always been there but never accessible until now. You okay, Captain? Zoro asked quietly, noticing his introspection. Luffy nodded slowly. Yeah. Just thinking that Grandpa's gonna be really mad when he finds out about all this. The unexpected response startled a laugh from Zoro. That's what you're worried about? Garp's reaction. Luffy grinned. Well, he's scarier than any admiral. Their laughter briefly cut through the tension, a reminder that despite prophecies, ancient powers, and approaching enemies, they were still themselves, the Straw Hat Pirates, facing the next adventure together. As they moved to join the preparations, Luffy glanced back at his parents, Dragon issuing orders with calm authority, Aurora studying him with a mixture of pride and concern. For the first time in his life, he was seeing where he came from, understanding pieces of himself that had always been mysteries. Whatever came next, he wouldn't face it alone. He had his crew, his nakama. And now, against all odds, he had found his family too. The next 3 days would determine whether that newly discovered family would survive to know each other better, or be torn apart forever by the forces that had separated them 20 years ago. Chapter 3, The Blood of D. 3 days felt like 3 minutes. New Baltigo transformed from a hidden sanctuary into a fortress preparing for siege. Revolutionary Army members fortified defenses, stockpiled weapons, and evacuated non-combatants to deeper safe houses within the island's cave network. Luffy hadn't slept much. Every waking hour was spent with Aurora, learning to access and control the abilities awakened by the ancient bracelet. The training was grueling, more mentally taxing than anything he'd experienced before. Focus, Aurora instructed as they stood facing each other in a training room carved from the island's rock. Feel the gravity around you not as an outside force, but as an extension of your own will. Luffy concentrated, sweat beading on his forehead. The bracelet, now seemingly fused with his skin, emitted a faint blue glow. Slowly, the air around him rippled, and he felt his body lighten. That's it, Aurora encouraged. Don't fight against gravity, assert your authority over it. Luffy's feet lifted an inch off the ground. Then two. Then, whoa, he exclaimed as he suddenly shot upward, colliding with the ceiling before dropping back down. Aurora caught him with practiced ease. Better. You're accessing the ability faster now. But I still can't control it, Luffy said, rubbing his head where it had hit stone. Control comes with practice. Aurora's smile was tired but proud. You've made more progress in 3 days than I did in 3 years. Zoro, who'd been watching from the edge of the room, nodded. Your hockey's changing too. It's sharper somehow. He wasn't wrong. Luffy had noticed it himself, his observation hockey now extended further, perceived more clearly. His armament hockey carried that strange blue iridescence, and it seemed to penetrate deeper when he struck practice targets. And his conqueror's hockey. Try again, Aurora said, setting up a row of glass bottles. One at a time. Luffy focused on the leftmost bottle, directing his will toward it with careful precision. The bottle shattered, just that one, leaving the others intact. Perfect, Aurora said. Kogan's gravity affects everything in its range indiscriminately. Your ability to target precisely gives you an advantage. If I can hit him, Luffy pointed out. When, Aurora corrected. When you hit him. The confidence in her voice bolstered him, though exhaustion pulled at his limbs. They'd been training almost continuously, stopping only for meals, which Sanji insisted on, and brief medical checks, which Chopper demanded. The rest of the Straw Hats were busy too, integrated into new Baltigo's defense plans. Frankie worked with revolutionary engineers to enhance the fortress's weapons systems. Nami collaborated with their meteorologists to prepare weather-based countermeasures. Robin, fascinated by the Revolutionary Army's extensive archives, divided her time between research and strategic planning. Even as they prepared for battle, Luffy couldn't shake a strange feeling, a tension between his usual straightforward approach to problems and this new, more complex situation. He wasn't just fighting for adventure or to protect his friends now. He was entangled in something ancient, something that preceded his own dreams and ambitions. A knock at the training room door interrupted his thoughts. Dragon entered, his face even more serious than usual. "They're here," he said simply. "Kogan's fleet has been spotted approaching the Western Channel." Aurora straightened, all weariness vanishing from her posture. "Earlier than expected." "They've been pushing their ships hard," Dragon confirmed. 3 battleships, 2 SSG vessels, and Kogan's flagship. "Fewer than reported," Zoro noted. "Where are the others?" Dragon's expression darkened. "Unknown. Possibly circling to approach from another direction. Or heading for other targets," Aurora suggested grimly. Haven was just one of many sanctuaries. Luffy cracked his knuckles. "Doesn't matter how many ships they have. We'll smash 'em all." Dragon and Aurora exchanged a look, equal parts pride and concern. "The revolutionary commanders have assembled in the war room," Dragon said. "We need to finalize our strategy." They followed him through corridors bustling with activity. Revolutionary fighters rushed past, carrying weapons or manning defensive positions. The atmosphere was tense but disciplined. These people had prepared for this day. In the war room, the Straw Hats had already gathered with Dragon's top commanders. A large tactical display showed the approaching Navy fleet and new Baltigo's defenses. "There you are," Nami said as Luffy entered. "How's the training going?" "He's progressing remarkably," Aurora answered before Luffy could. "But we need more time." "Time we don't have," Sabo said grimly, pointing to the display. "Kogan's flagship is equipped with the latest SSG weapons. They could begin bombardment within an hour." "Let them come," Luffy said, stepping up to the table. "We've got something they don't expect. Your awakened abilities aren't enough against an admiral and 5 warships," Jinbe cautioned. "We need a cohesive strategy." Dragon nodded. "Agreed. I propose 3 lines of defense." He indicated points on the display. Sea-based artillery to engage them at range. Aerial forces to intercept bombardment. And if they manage to land troops, close-quarters combat units inside the fortress. "We should focus on Kogan," Aurora said. "Without him, the regular forces will be more manageable." "I'll take Kogan," Luffy stated flatly. It wasn't a suggestion. Aurora frowned. "Luffy, you're not ready." "I don't need to be ready," he interrupted. "I just need to be me." The simple confidence in his voice silenced her objections. Dragon, however, wasn't so easily convinced. "Kogan isn't just powerful," he said. "He's methodical, experienced. He'll have studied your fighting style, prepared countermeasures." "Good," Luffy replied. "Then he'll be looking for the wrong things." Aurora couldn't help smiling at that. He has a point. Kogan expects rubber powers and conventional hockey. He doesn't know about the awakening. Further discussion was interrupted by an alarm blaring throughout the fortress. A revolutionary rushed into the room. They've opened fire. Long-range bombardment. Dragon's response was immediate. Defensive positions. Execute countermeasures as planned. He turned to Luffy and the Straw Hats. You know your roles. May fortune favor us all. As they rushed to their assigned positions, Luffy caught Aurora's arm. Mom, he said, the word still feeling new on his tongue. Stay safe. Her eyes softened. You too. She hesitated, then pulled him into a quick, fierce hug. I'm so proud of you. Whatever happens today, remember that. Before Luffy could respond, she was gone, moving with surprising speed toward her position in the command center. He watched her disappear around a corner, a strange tightness in his chest. Ready, Captain? Zoro asked, appearing at his side. Luffy nodded, his face setting in determination. Let's go show that Admiral who he's messing with. The battle began with thunder. Navy ships launched specialized shells that penetrated New Baltigo's outer defenses before exploding. Revolutionary gunners returned fire, their cannons sending answering explosions across the water. The morning sky darkened with smoke and fire. From his position on one of the higher watchtowers, Luffy watched the naval exchange with uncharacteristic patience. He, Zoro, and Sanji formed a strike team ready to intercept any high-value targets that might break through. Look, Sanji said, pointing toward Kogan's flagship. Something's happening. Through his enhanced observation haki, Luffy sensed a massive concentration of energy building on the Admiral's ship. Everyone get down. He shouted into the Den Mushi connecting him to the defensive stations. Moments later, a beam of concentrated force shot from the flagship's bow cannon, not explosive but something worse. Where it struck the cliffside defenses, gravity itself seemed to warp. Stone crumbled and compressed, revolutionary fighters caught in its path flattened against the ground or pulled apart by competing gravitational forces. SSG gravity cannon, Sanji murmured. So the rumors were true. That's our cue, Luffy decided, already moving. Zoro, Sanji, take out that cannon. I'll find Kogan. They nodded, needing no further instruction. Years of fighting together had forged an understanding that transcended words. As one, they launched themselves from the watchtower. Sanji's sky walk carried him over the water in rapid bounds. Zoro, lacking the ability to fly, was grabbed by Luffy and flung toward the flagship with pinpoint accuracy. Luffy himself activated his newly enhanced abilities, the bracelet glowing as he manipulated gravity around his body. The sensation was different from his Gear 4th bounces. Rather than propelling himself with force, he simply asserted that gravity should affect him differently. The result was a controlled flight that caught the Navy gunners by surprise. They tracked and fired at where they expected Rubberman Luffy to be, not where Sovereign Luffy actually was. Landing on the flagship's deck, Luffy immediately sensed Kogan's presence, a crushing aura of power emanating from the bridge. But before he could head there, a squad of Marines surrounded him, weapons raised. Straw Hat Luffy, their commander shouted. Surrender in the name of justice. Luffy didn't bother responding with words. His conqueror's haki flared, not in the usual uncontrolled wave, but as a precise, directed force. The Marines dropped unconscious, but the deck beneath them remained intact, unlike previous occasions when his haki had damaged his surroundings. Impressive control, a familiar voice observed. You've been training. Admiral Kogan stood on the upper deck, hands clasped behind his back. His silver hair gleamed in the battle light, his scarred face impassive. Where I come from, it's polite to knock before boarding someone's ship, he continued, voice deceptively casual. But then, pirates were never known for their manners. Luffy straightened, studying his opponent. You attacked our home. Did you expect us to just let you? Our home, Kogan repeated, a cold smile forming. So you've fully embraced your heritage then. The son of Dragon and Aurora. The culmination of two bloodlines the world government has sought to eradicate for centuries. I'm just Luffy, he replied simply. And you tried to hurt my mom. Something flickered in Kogan's eyes, surprise, perhaps, at Luffy's straightforward response. He'd clearly expected fear or anger, not this calm determination. Your mother, Kogan said, moving to descend the stairs to the main deck, is a thief and a traitor. The knowledge she stole from O'Hara was not hers to take. The secrets she's kept have cost countless lives. Pretty rich coming from someone who works for the people who destroyed O'Hara, Luffy replied. He didn't move as Kogan approached, standing his ground. I don't expect someone raised by criminals to understand, Kogan said dismissively. The world government maintains order. Without it, we'd return to the chaos of the Void Century, unchecked powers, devastating weapons, wars that could destroy entire seas. Funny, Luffy said. From what I've learned, it was your world government that started those wars. Because they couldn't stand someone else being free. Kogan's expression hardened. Enough talk. You've made your choice, siding with revolutionaries and pirates. The five elders have declared that the bloodline of D must not continue. Nothing personal, Straw Hat. Just the necessities of history. The admiral raised his hand, and instantly gravity around Luffy intensified. The deck beneath his feet cracked as his body was pushed downward with crushing force. Or at least, that's what should have happened. Instead, Luffy stood unaffected, a faint blue aura surrounding him. The bracelet on his wrist pulsed with light. What? Kogan's composure cracked, genuine shock registering on his face. Luffy grinned. Told you I'm just Luffy. But maybe I'm a bit more than you expected. He moved faster than Kogan could track, crossing the distance between them in an instant. His fist, coated in that strange iridescent hockey, connected with the admiral's chest. Kogan flew backward, crashing through the bridge windows. But the admiral recovered quickly, rising from the wreckage with only minor injuries. Interesting, he said, brushing glass from his coat. You've acquired new powers. His eyes narrowed. Aurora's been teaching you the old ways. Luffy didn't confirm or deny. Instead, he shifted his stance, ready for the admiral's counterattack. It came with devastating force. Kogan unleashed his full power, warping gravity in complex patterns. No longer a simple increase in weight, but directional pulls, sudden shifts, and localized distortions. Luffy found himself battling not just an opponent but the fabric of space around him. Even with his new abilities, adapting was challenging. He was flung against a mast, then pulled toward Kogan's waiting fist, then abruptly slammed into the deck. You've learned some tricks, Kogan acknowledged as he pressed his advantage. But I've spent decades mastering my powers. You've had what, days? Weeks at most. Luffy didn't waste breath responding. Instead, he focused inward, remembering Aurora's training. Don't fight the gravity. Assert your will over it. The bracelet pulsed, and suddenly he could feel the currents of Kogan's power like visible streams in the air. With newfound perception, he began to navigate the gravity fields, moving through them rather than against them. Kogan's expression shifted from confidence to concern as Luffy gradually gained ground. Meanwhile, across the ship, Zoro and Sanji had engaged the gravity cannon's operators and its guard detail. The revolutionary forces had begun to push back against the Navy bombardment, heartened by the sight of Straw Hats engaging the flagship. On the new Baltigo command deck, Aurora watched the distant battle through a spyglass, her face tight with concern. He's holding his own, Dragon observed from beside her, tracking the flashes of light and power from the flagship. Better than we could have hoped. It's not enough, Aurora replied. Kogan is still testing him, measuring his capabilities. The real attack hasn't begun yet. As if summoned by her words, a new energy began to build around the admiral. The sea itself seemed to respond, waves flattening unnaturally around the flagship. "He's using his awakened form," Aurora whispered, dread in her voice. "Dragon, he's going to." Before she could finish, a massive gravitational pulse erupted from Kogan's position. The flagship's deck buckled under the strain. Water near the ship began to rise upward, defying natural law. And at the center stood Kogan, his body glowing with dark energy, his feet no longer touching the deck but hovering above it. "Awakened devil fruit," Dragon confirmed grimly. "He can manipulate gravity at a fundamental level now." Through her spyglass, Aurora saw Luffy struggling against this new assault. The blue aura protecting him flickered as Kogan's power intensified. "He's not ready for this," she said, lowering the spyglass. "I have to help him." Dragon caught her arm. "Aurora, you're still recovering. Facing Kogan in your condition, he's my son," she interrupted, steel in her voice. "I won't watch him die." Before Dragon could argue further, a new threat emerged. Alarms blared throughout New Baltigo as sensors detected additional ships approaching from the east, the missing vessels from Kogan's reported fleet. They circled the island, Koala reported, rushing into the command center. "Submarines. They're deploying troops directly into the lower tunnels." Dragon's face darkened. "A diversion," he realized. "Kogan engaged us head-on while their special forces infiltrated from behind." "Their target is obvious," Aurora said. "The archives. The knowledge we've gathered about the Void Century, the ancient weapons, the will of D." Dragon turned to his commanders. "Reinforce the archive defenses immediately. Nothing can fall into their hands." As New Baltigo erupted into renewed chaos, Aurora made her decision. "I'm going to Luffy," she stated, not asking permission. Dragon looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once. "Go. I'll handle things here." He hesitated, then added quietly, "Bring our son home." Aurora's eyes softened. She reached up, placing a hand on Dragon's cheek, a rare moment of tenderness between the revolutionary leader and the scholar who had shared his life and struggles. "I will." With that promise, she was gone, racing toward the air defense platforms where revolutionary flyers prepared to engage the Navy ships. Her injuries slowed her, but determination drove her forward. Behind her, the sounds of battle intensified as Marines breached the lower levels of the fortress. On the flagship, Luffy found himself in the fight of his life. Kogan's awakened gravity powers created a battlefield where conventional physics no longer applied. Parts of the deck flowed like liquid while others became dense as steel. The air itself became heavy or thin unpredictably. "You see now," Kogan called, hovering above the chaos he'd created. "This is true mastery. Your mother never achieved this level of control over her heritage powers." Luffy gritted his teeth, maintaining a bubble of normal space around himself through sheer willpower. The bracelet burned against his skin, pushing his nascent abilities to their limit. "Good effort," Kogan acknowledged. "But futile." He gestured, and gravity around Luffy intensified beyond anything he'd experienced before. This time, his protection failed. Luffy crashed to the deck, his body creating a crater in the wood. Every muscle strained against the crushing pressure. The bracelet flickered, its glow dimming. "You've surprised me, Straw Hat," Kogan said, descending to stand over him. "I didn't expect Aurora to have taught you so much in so little time. Your potential is concerning." Despite the pressure, Luffy managed to lift his head, meeting the Admiral's gaze defiantly. "Which is why I can't allow you to develop further," Kogan continued. "The 5 elders were explicit, the bloodline ends today." He raised his hand, concentrating his power. The gravity around Luffy became so intense that the deck beneath him began to splinter and compress. In that moment of extremity, something strange happened. Time seemed to slow. The bracelet's flickering light stabilized, then grew brighter. And within Luffy's mind, voices spoke, not audible, but felt, as if ancestral memories were surfacing from his very blood. They spoke of sovereign will, of the rightful order of things, of powers that predated devil fruits and the world government's rule. They spoke of birthrights and responsibilities, of promises made centuries ago. And they spoke of Aurora, not just as his mother, but as a carrier of ancient knowledge, a protector of truths the world had forgotten. As these revelations cascaded through his consciousness, Luffy found new strength. His body, on the verge of breaking under Kogan's power, suddenly pulsed with blue-gold light. The bracelet fully integrated with his skin, its patterns extending up his arm and across his torso. "What is this?" Kogan demanded, sensing the shift. With a roar that contained generations of defiance, Luffy broke free of the gravity field. He rose to his feet, standing straight despite forces that should have crushed him to atoms. His eyes glowed with the same blue-gold light as the bracelet, and the air around him rippled with power. "Impossible," Kogan breathed, taking an involuntary step back. "You can't have awakened the Sovereign's will so quickly. It takes years of training, decades of—" "I told you," Luffy interrupted, his voice resonating strangely. "I'm just Luffy." He moved, not the rubber-enhanced speed Kogan had prepared for, but something else entirely. One moment he stood in the crater, the next, he was directly before the Admiral, hand outstretched. "Sovereign's will, dominion," Luffy intoned, the words coming from somewhere beyond conscious thought. When his palm connected with Kogan's chest, the Admiral's gravity field collapsed completely. The awakened devil fruit power that had warped the very ship around them simply stopped. Kogan stared in shock, attempting to reactivate his abilities without success. "What have you done?" he demanded, real fear in his voice for the first time. "I remembered who I am," Luffy answered simply. Then he drew back his other hand, coating it in Conqueror's haki infused with sovereign power. "And I remembered what you did to my mom." The punch that followed sent Admiral Kogan flying the length of the ship, crashing through multiple structures before slamming into the main mast with enough force to crack it. He slumped to the deck, conscious but severely injured. Luffy approached slowly, the glow around him subsiding but not disappearing entirely. Marines who had recovered from his earlier haki took one look at him and backed away, sensing power beyond their capacity to challenge. Kogan struggled to rise, wiping blood from his mouth. "Kill me then," he said bitterly. "Prove that the D bloodline brings only destruction, just as the elders have always claimed." Luffy stopped before him, looking down at the defeated Admiral. "I don't need to kill you to win," he said. "And I don't need to prove anything to the 5 elders." Before Kogan could respond, a new voice called from above. "Luffy!" Aurora descended from a revolutionary flying craft, landing gracefully on the deck despite her still healing injuries. Her eyes widened at the scene, the ship's extensive damage, the cowering Marines, Kogan defeated at Luffy's feet, and Luffy himself glowing with ancestral power. "You did it," she breathed, both pride and astonishment in her voice. "You fully awakened." Luffy turned to her, and for a moment, the ancient power made him look older, weightier with responsibility. Then he grinned, that same carefree, joyful grin he'd had since childhood, and the illusion broke. "Yeah," he said. "It was weird. I heard voices, and then everything just made sense." Aurora approached cautiously, studying the patterns of light that still traced his skin. "The ancestral memories," she murmured. "They chose to reveal themselves to you. Is that unusual?" Luffy asked. "Unprecedented," she replied. "Most D-carriers spend decades in meditation and training to access even fragments of those memories." A bitter laugh from Kogan interrupted them. "Of course," he said. "The son of Dragon and Aurora. The culmination of 2 powerful D bloodlines. The 5 elders will be displeased." Aurora turned to the Admiral, her expression hardening. "The 5 elders have been living on borrowed time for centuries, Kogan. The truth can't stay buried forever." "Truth," he spat. "Your truth would bring chaos." The ancient kingdom fell because its power was too great, its ambitions too vast. History repeats, Aurora. Your son may have defeated me, but the full might of the world government will have to wait for another day, Luffy interrupted. Right now, you're attacking our home, and that stops. As if emphasizing his point, the ship rocked violently. Zoro and Sanji had successfully disabled the gravity cannon, and revolutionary forces were now targeting the flagship itself with conventional weapons. We need to go, Aurora urged, glancing at the burning sections of the vessel. This ship won't stay afloat much longer. Luffy nodded, but before they could move, Kogan made one last, desperate attempt. Drawing a concealed sea stone knife, he lunged for Aurora, hatred contorting his features. If I die, you die with me, O'Hara Witch. Luffy reacted instinctively. His hand shot out, and a pulse of sovereign power froze Kogan mid-lunge. The Admiral hung suspended in air, knife inches from Aurora's heart. That, Luffy said calmly, was a mistake. With a flick of his wrist, he sent Kogan crashing into the ship's railing. The Admiral lay still, finally unconscious. Aurora stared at Luffy, shock evident on her face. That level of gravity manipulation, even I can't do that with such precision. Luffy shrugged. Felt natural somehow. He looked down at his hands, where the glow was already fading. Like part of me always knew how, but couldn't reach it before. Before they could discuss it further, Zoro and Sanji rejoined them, both bearing injuries but looking satisfied. Cannons destroyed, Sanji reported. And the engine room is having an unfortunate accident involving several explosive barrels. Time to go, Zoro added unnecessarily. The four made their way to the ship's edge. Revolutionary flyers were already evacuating their fighters from other Navy vessels, many of which were now in flames or sinking. The tide of battle had turned decisively. Can you fly us back? Aurora asked Luffy, eyeing the distance to shore. He grinned. Let's find out. Focusing on his newly awakened abilities, Luffy created a field of altered gravity that enveloped all four of them. Together they rose from the flagship's deck, just as explosions began to tear through its lower sections. As they soared toward New Baltigo, Aurora couldn't take her eyes off her son. You're a natural, she said softly. It took me years to master sustained flight. Zoro weighs a ton though, Luffy complained good-naturedly. Must be all that sake. Oi, the swordsman grumbled, but there was no real irritation in it. Their victory at sea, however, was overshadowed by what they found upon returning to the fortress. Marines from the submarine attack had penetrated deep into New Baltigo, engaging revolutionary forces in fierce close-quarters combat throughout the lower levels. They're after the archives, Aurora explained as they rushed through corridors bearing signs of recent fighting. Everything we've gathered about the Void Century, the ancient weapons, the will of D, it's all there. Along with the location of every sanctuary and revolutionary army base in the world, Sanji added grimly. If they get that information. They needed no further motivation. Fighting their way deeper into the fortress, they linked up with other Straw Hats and revolutionary fighters pushing back against the marine incursion. Luffy. Nami called, spotting them from a defensive position she held with Robin and Usopp. What happened to you? You're glowing. Long story, he replied. Where's Dad? Defending the Central Archive, Robin answered, her multiple arms dispatching Marines with efficient brutality. The world government sent CP0 agents with the Marines. They're after specific documents. Aurora's face paled. We need to get there now. Together, they fought through waves of Marines, Luffy's awakened powers clearing paths where the fighting was thickest. His control was still raw, sometimes erratic, but devastatingly effective. Where conventional weapons and devil fruits had limitations, the sovereigns will seem to adapt to each challenge, as if responding to his needs instinctively. They reached the Central Archive, a massive chamber filled with shelves of books, scrolls, and artifacts. At its center, Dragon fought alongside Sabo and Koala against 3 CP0 agents. Despite their combined strength, they were being pushed back. One of the agents, a tall woman with silver hair similar to Kogan's, held a stack of documents already seized from the archives. "We have what we came for," she announced to her companions. "Initiate withdrawal." "I don't think so," Luffy said, stepping forward. The sovereign glow had dimmed but still outlined his body, marking him as something beyond ordinary. The CP0 agents paused, assessing this new threat. Their leader's eyes widened slightly at Luffy's appearance. "So it's true," she said. The bloodline awakened. She glanced at Aurora, who had moved to Dragon's side. "The 5 elders will be most interested in this development." "They can keep being interested from a distance," Luffy replied. "Those papers don't belong to you." The agent smiled coldly. "Knowledge is the greatest weapon in the world government's arsenal, Straw Hat. More powerful than battleships or devil fruits." She gestured to her companions. "Secure our exit. I'll handle this." What followed was a battle unlike any the archives had witnessed in its existence. The CP0 agent, clearly enhanced beyond normal human capabilities, moved with blinding speed, targeting not just Luffy but Aurora specifically. The mother and son, together at last, she taunted, evading Luffy's attacks with inhuman flexibility. "How convenient for us to eliminate both bloodlines at once." But she had miscalculated Luffy's growth. His awakened powers, combined with years of battle experience, made him a devastating opponent. Where she expected rubber attacks, she faced gravity manipulation. Where she anticipated predictable hockey use, she encountered the precise, targeted will imposition of a sovereign descendant. The tide turned when Luffy managed to separate her from the stolen documents, knocking them from her grasp with a carefully controlled gravity pulse. Robin's multiple arms appeared instantly, securing the papers before they could scatter. Realizing their primary objective was compromised, the CP0 agents shifted to their contingency plan. The leader produced a small device from within her coat. "If we can't have the knowledge," she declared, "no one will." Too late, Aurora recognized what she held. "It's a trigger for planted explosives. Everyone out now." Chaos erupted as revolutionary fighters and straw hats began evacuating the archive. Dragon organized the retreat while Robin and the archivists grabbed what crucial documents they could. The CP0 agent used the distraction to make her escape, but not before activating the device. A series of muffled booms echoed throughout New Baltigo's lower levels. They're collapsing the supporting structures, Jinbe realized as dust and small debris began raining from the ceiling. The entire fortress will cave in. "How long do we have?" Luffy asked, helping an injured revolutionary to his feet. "Minutes at most," Dragon estimated, his face grim. "Get everyone to the upper levels and emergency exits." As the evacuation proceeded, Luffy found himself working alongside both his parents for the first time, Dragon coordinating escape routes, Aurora guiding people to safety, and Luffy using his powers to hold back falling debris and create paths where passages had collapsed. It was strange and yet somehow right, this impromptu family cooperation in crisis. Despite the danger, Luffy found himself observing them both, noting traits he shared with each, Dragon's decisive leadership, Aurora's resourceful adaptability, both of their unflinching courage. "The main archive chamber is clear," Koala reported as the last of the researchers evacuated. "But we've lost contact with the teams in the lower tunnels." "I'll find them," Luffy volunteered immediately. Aurora caught his arm. "Luffy, those tunnels are already collapsing. Even with your powers, I can do it," he insisted. "Trust me." Something in his eyes, determination, certainly, but also newfound confidence in his abilities, convinced her. She nodded once. "Be careful." "Always am," he replied with a grin that directly contradicted his words. As Luffy raced toward the lower tunnels, Aurora turned to Dragon. "He gets that recklessness from you, you know." Despite everything, Dragon's lips curved in a rare smile. I was about to say the same about you. Together, they continued coordinating the evacuation, working in tandem with the efficiency of people who had fought side by side for years. Whatever complexities existed in their relationship, in crisis they were perfectly aligned. Meanwhile, Luffy descended into increasingly unstable sections of the fortress. His enhanced observation Haki detected life signs deeper in the tunnel network, revolutionary fighters trapped by debris or fighting rearguard actions against remaining marines. Using his awakened abilities, he manipulated gravity to clear paths, lift fallen stone, and occasionally send hostile marines flying. The deeper he went, the more unstable the structure became, massive stone blocks shifting ominously above him. He found the first group of trapped revolutionaries behind a collapsed tunnel section. Creating a localized anti-gravity field, he lifted the debris long enough for them to escape. Head up that way, he instructed, pointing toward the path he'd cleared. My crew is helping people at the junction. There are more of us trapped further down, one of the fighters informed him. At least 10, maybe more. Luffy nodded, already moving deeper despite the increasingly dangerous conditions. The entire mountain seemed to be groaning now, the ancient stone preparing to reclaim the spaces humans had carved within it. He located the remaining revolutionaries in what had once been a storage area, now a death trap of fallen rocks and narrowing exits. Several were injured, and marines had them pinned down from a partially collapsed adjacent chamber. Straw Hat, one of the marines called upon spotting him. Surrender now. This whole place is coming down, we can get you out safely if you cooperate. Thanks for the offer, Luffy replied casually, but I've got my own exit plan. Before the marines could respond, he unleashed a precisely controlled wave of Conqueror's Haki, just enough to render them unconscious without causing further structural damage. Then he turned to the trapped revolutionaries. Everyone who can walk, help someone who can't, he ordered. We're leaving now. Using his gravity manipulation, Luffy created a stable tunnel through the debris, holding the weight of the mountain at bay through sheer force of will. The bracelet on his wrist glowed brilliantly with the effort, and sweat poured down his face. Hurry, he urged as the revolutionaries filed past him. I can't hold this forever. When the last of them had passed, Luffy began his own retreat, maintaining the anti-gravity field around himself as he moved. But the mountain's patience had run out. With a sound like thunder, the remaining supports gave way, and thousands of tons of rock began their final collapse. Luffy ran, boosting his speed with controlled gravity manipulation. The tunnel behind him disappeared in a cascade of stone and dust. Ahead, daylight beckoned from a distant exit. He pushed harder, lungs burning, the weight of his power use beginning to take its toll. Just as it seemed he might not make it, a familiar voice called his name. Aurora stood at the tunnel exit, hands outstretched, her own power creating a counterforce to the collapsing mountain. Mom, he shouted, redoubling his efforts. Jump, she commanded. Trusting her completely, Luffy launched himself forward. Their powers connected in mid-air, mother and son, both wielding the same ancient heritage. The resulting energy pulse blasted outward, temporarily halting the tunnel's collapse. Luffy shot through the opening like a bullet, crashing into Aurora and sending them both tumbling to safety just as the exit disappeared in a final avalanche of stone. For a moment, they lay where they had fallen, dust-covered and breathing hard. Then Aurora started to laugh, a sound of pure relief and disbelieving joy. Luffy joined in, his usual shishishi mixing with her deeper chuckle in perfect familial harmony. Dragon found them like that moments later, still laughing amid the ruins of what had once been New Baltigo's grand entrance. His normally stern face softened at the sight. If you two are quite finished, he said dryly, we have an evacuation to complete. Aurora stood, helping Luffy to his feet. Both were filthy, scraped, and exhausted, and both were grinning. Everyone make it out? Luffy asked, suddenly serious again. Dragon nodded. Thanks to you. The last group you sent up reached the surface safely. He looked between them. Your mother was supposed to be on the first transport out. And miss all the fun. Aurora replied innocently. Besides, someone had to save our son from his heroics. I had it under control, Luffy protested. Of course you did, she agreed, not bothering to hide her skepticism. As they bantered, the full scope of what had happened became visible. New Baltigo, the fortress, sanctuary, and Revolutionary Army headquarters, was largely destroyed. The mountain itself had partially collapsed, creating a new landscape of broken stone and exposed tunnels. Revolutionary ships and aircraft circled overhead, collecting survivors from designated meeting points. The Navy fleet, however, was in retreat. With Kogan defeated and their infiltration team either captured or buried in the collapse, they had no choice but to withdraw and regroup. A Pyrrhic victory at best, Dragon observed grimly, watching the destruction of years of work and accumulated knowledge. They didn't get what they came for, but we've lost our strongest base. We saved what matters, Aurora countered, placing a hand on his arm. The people. The core archives. The future. She glanced at Luffy. And we gained something unexpected. Dragon followed her gaze, studying his son with new eyes. The sovereign glow had faded now, but something fundamental had changed about Luffy. He stood straighter, his presence somehow larger, more defined, as if he had finally grown into a destiny he hadn't known awaited him. Yes, Dragon agreed quietly. Perhaps we did. The Straw Hats regrouped at a plateau above the destruction, where Chopper had established a field medical station. Injuries were treated, stories exchanged, plans discussed. The Revolutionary Army was already organizing its scattered forces, preparing to disperse to backup locations throughout the world. As sunset painted the sky in fiery hues, Luffy found himself standing between his parents at the plateau's edge, looking out over the changed landscape. None of them spoke for a time, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Luffy broke the silence. What happens now? It was a simple question that encompassed countless complexities, about his awakened powers, about the world government's response, about their future as a family, if indeed they had one. Now, Aurora said, the world government knows that the bloodline has fully awakened. They will redouble their efforts against both the Revolutionary Army and the Straw Hat Pirates. Let them come, Luffy said with characteristic confidence. It's not that simple, Dragon cautioned. What happened today changes the equation. The five elders will see you as an existential threat now, not just a troublesome pirate. So nothing's really changed, Luffy pointed out. They've been trying to kill me since Enies Lobby. Aurora smiled slightly. He has a point. The difference, Dragon said, is that now they'll bring everything they have. No holding back, no strategic restraint. They'll sacrifice whatever is necessary to eliminate the possibility of a true sovereign returning. Luffy considered this, then shrugged. Still doesn't change anything for me. I'm going to find the One Piece and become king of the pirates. Whatever the world government does, I'll deal with it along the way. The simple determination in his voice was so familiar to both of them, echoes of their own youthful certainty, before years of struggle had taught them caution. But in Luffy, that determination hadn't been tempered by defeat or compromise. It remained pure, almost innocent in its straightforwardness. Your path is your own, Aurora acknowledged. As it should be. But know that you don't walk it alone anymore. She hesitated, then added softly, if you want us in your life, that is. Luffy turned to her, surprise evident on his face. Why wouldn't I? We haven't exactly been there for you, she said, regret heavy in her voice. For 20 years, we made choices that kept us apart from you. You have every right to resent that. Luffy thought about this for a moment, his face unusually serious. Then he grinned. Nah. You did what you thought was right. And anyway, I turned out pretty awesome, didn't I? The unexpected response startled a laugh from Aurora. Yes, she agreed, eyes shining with unshed tears. You certainly did. Dragon, less demonstrative but no less moved, placed a hand on Luffy's shoulder. You have surpassed both of us already, he said quietly. What you did today, fully awakening the Sovereign's will, defeating an admiral, saving all those people, it would have taken either of us years of training to accomplish. I had good teachers, Luffy replied simply. Not just you guys, but everyone who helped me along the way. Shanks, Rayleigh, my crew. He looked back toward where his friends waited. They're why I'm strong. The profound truth in that statement hung in the air between them. For all the talk of bloodlines and heritage, Luffy's greatest strength had always been his ability to connect with others, to inspire loyalty and love, to form bonds that transcended background or circumstance. Perhaps that, more than any inherited power, was the true mark of a sovereign. Your journey continues then, Aurora said. Toward Laugh Tale and the One Piece. Luffy nodded. And yours? The Revolutionary Army must rebuild, Dragon answered. New bases, new strategies. What happened today will ripple across the world. We need to be ready for the response. And I have knowledge to safeguard, Aurora added. What we saved from the archives must be distributed, protected. The truth about the Void Century can't be lost again. Luffy looked between them, suddenly understanding that this reunion, however meaningful, was temporary. They each had their paths to follow, their responsibilities to bear. The family they might have been 20 years ago was impossible now. But perhaps a different kind of family was possible. You could sail with us for a while, he suggested. Until you need to go back to your work. Aurora's eyes widened slightly. You would want that? Sure, Luffy said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. We've got a lot of catching up to do, right? And you can help me figure out these new powers. Dragon and Aurora exchanged a glance, one of those silent communications that spoke of years of shared history. Then Aurora nodded. I would like that very much, she said softly. Though I warn you, I'm not much of a sailor. Luffy laughed. That's okay. Nami's the best navigator in the world. She'll make sure we don't get lost. Dragon, predictably, declined. My place is with the army, especially now. But perhaps our paths will cross again, sooner rather than later. Luffy nodded, understanding. He hadn't really expected his father to join them, Dragon's dedication to his cause was too absolute for that. But the acknowledgement that they might meet again was more than he'd had before. As the three of them stood there, framed by the sunset and the ruins of New Baltigo, a new understanding formed between them. Not the conventional family they might have been, but something unique to their extraordinary circumstances, three carriers of the will of D, each following their own path toward a shared horizon. Come on, Luffy said finally. Let's tell the others. Sanji will be excited to cook for someone new. Together, they walked back toward the Straw Hats, who watched their approach with curious eyes. Explanations would be needed, plans made, courses charted. But all that could wait for tomorrow. Tonight, for the first time in 20 years, Monkey D. Luffy would share a meal with his mother. And for now, that was enough. 1 week later, the Thousand Sunny sailed through calm seas, its course set for the next island on the path to Laugh Tale. Aurora had integrated seamlessly into life aboard ship, her scholarly nature finding common ground with Robin, her strategic mind appreciating Nami's navigational skills, her fighting prowess earning Zoro's tacit respect. But it was with Luffy that she spent most of her time, teaching him to control and develop his awakened abilities. They trained daily on the deck, their sessions drawing an audience of fascinated crew members. The key is intention, Aurora explained as they practiced gravity manipulation. Your will must be absolutely clear, without doubt or hesitation. Luffy concentrated, lifting a barrel into the air without touching it. Like this? Good, she confirmed. Now, try moving it in a specific pattern. The barrel began to trace figure eights in the air above the deck. Luffy's control had improved dramatically in just a week, his natural affinity for the sovereign powers accelerating his learning curve beyond anything Aurora had anticipated. "Show off," Zoro commented from where he watched, but there was approval in his voice. "Can you teach me to do the thing where you stopped Kogan's devil fruit?" Luffy asked eagerly. Aurora's expression grew more serious. "That's more complicated. It requires understanding the fundamental nature of devil fruits themselves." "Which is what, exactly?" Robin asked, looking up from her book with scholarly interest. Aurora hesitated, clearly weighing how much to reveal. "Devil fruits are artificial," she said carefully. "Created during the Void Century as a way to grant specific powers without the training traditionally required." "Created by whom?" Robin pressed. "The Ancient Kingdom, originally," Aurora admitted. "As tools for their citizens. But the fruits were corrupted, somehow, during the Great War. Their true purpose distorted." This was clearly new information even to Robin. "And the sovereign powers can override them because they're more fundamental?" "Exactly," Aurora confirmed. "The will of D connects to the original order of things, the natural flow of energy and matter. Devil fruits impose a different order, powerful, but ultimately secondary." Luffy, who had been listening with unusual attentiveness, frowned. "So my rubber powers are fake?" Aurora shook her head quickly. "Not fake. Just different in origin. The Gomu Gomu no Mi is part of you now, integrated with your life force. In fact, your awakened devil fruit abilities might eventually merge with your sovereign powers in ways we can't predict." This seemed to satisfy him, and the training continued. But later, as the sun set and most of the crew retired below deck, Luffy found Aurora alone at the stern, looking out at their wake. "You didn't tell us everything about devil fruits," he said, joining her at the railing. She glanced at him, surprised by his perception. "No," she acknowledged. "Some knowledge is dangerous until you're ready for it." "Is it about the One Piece?" he asked directly. Aurora studied him for a long moment. "You've always been perceptive in your own way, haven't you? Seeing through to what really matters." "Rayleigh said something similar once," Luffy replied. "About the Void Century and what we might find at Laugh Tale. He offered to tell us everything, but I said no." "Why?" Aurora asked, genuinely curious. Luffy shrugged. "Because it wouldn't be an adventure if I knew everything ahead of time." He looked at her. "But this is different. This is about who I am, who we are." Aurora nodded slowly. "Yes, it is." She took a deep breath, then said, "The One Piece is connected to the will of D, to the sovereign lineage, to everything we've been discussing. When you find it, you'll understand not just the Void Century, but the true nature of the world itself. And devil fruits are part of that. They are one piece of a larger puzzle," she confirmed. "Created for a purpose that was subverted. Just as the world government itself was built on a foundation of lies and stolen authority." Luffy absorbed this, looking out at the darkening horizon. "Dad thinks I'm supposed to fix all that. That I'm some kind of chosen one from the prophecy. And what do you think?" Aurora asked gently. He was quiet for a moment. "I think I just want to be free. To have adventures with my friends. To find the One Piece because that's what the Pirate King does." He turned to her. "But I also think that if being free means bringing down the people who hurt others, who take away their freedom, then that's what I'll do." Aurora smiled, recognizing in his simple wisdom the essence of what the ancient texts had described, a sovereign who ruled not from desire for power, but from an unshakable belief in freedom. "When you find the One Piece," she said quietly, "you'll face a choice. One that every bearer of the will of D has carried in their blood for 800 years. She placed her hand over his, where the bracelet had now fully integrated with his skin. "But whatever you choose, know that I believe in you. Not because of prophecy or bloodline, but because of who you are." Luffy grinned, the serious moment passing. "Thanks, Mom." The words still sounded new, but increasingly right. In just a week, they had begun building a relationship that neither had thought possible, not erasing the 20 years apart, but creating something new in the present. Now, Luffy said, stretching his arms above his head, can we get back to the flying lessons tomorrow? I almost had it today. Aurora laughed. Yes, though I'd appreciate if you didn't practice over the ocean again. Sanji is getting tired of fishing you out when you drop. One time. Luffy protested. That happened one time. Their easy banter continued as they headed below deck to join the others for Sanji's late-night snacks. Behind them, the Sunny's wake stretched back toward the horizon, toward New Baltigo, toward the confrontation with Kogan, toward the past that had shaped them. Ahead lay unknowns, the world government's response, the continuing mystery of the One Piece, the choices that would define not just Luffy's future but potentially the world's. But for now, mother and son walked side by side, their paths finally converged after 20 years apart. The blood of D flowed in both their veins, not just an ancient heritage, but a living connection between them, stronger than separation, more enduring than absence. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The end. Thank you for watching this video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video.